Now, before we go into the public hearing statement, is everyone in agreement with that? Okay. Kai, will you take item 11?
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. The handbook does provide that annual independent audits are to be provided to the Commission's financial statements every year. That has been done for the fiscal year 25-16, and the auditing firm, Canali, from the Vavrnik, Trine, and Day, the Commission's auditing firm, is here to present the annual audit.
Hi, good morning. My name is Kinali Sukasum, and I'm with Vavrnik, Trine, Day and Company. We've completed our audit of the financial statements of the Ventura Local Agency Formation Commission for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2016, and have issued an unmodified opinion or a clean opinion on the Commission's financial statements, which is the highest level of assurance on the Commission's financial statements. We also noted no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses in the Commission's internal control over financial reporting. Also, I'm happy to report that there are no difficulties or disagreements between us and Commission staff during the course of the audit. We appreciate the opportunity of serving as the Commission's external auditors and would like to thank Commission staff for their cooperation during the audit process. And if you have any questions related to the financial statements, I'm here and happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Thank you very much for being here. And the action is just to receive and file. Thank you.
Thank you.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. At this time, I will open it for public comments for items that are not currently on the agenda. I have no speaker cards for any other items. Is anyone here to speak on an item that is not scheduled on the agenda? Hearing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda.
I'll move approval of the consent agenda.
I'd like to pull the budget for one question, please.
Okay. The question?
Oh, okay. So, Mr. Loma, if you could explain what the other professional and specialized non-ISF is, the item 2199.
Thank you.
Professional, non-specialized.
I know it's the internal service fund, right?
I'm sorry?
It's the internal service fund.
Right, yeah, absolutely. That does account for the funds for the auditor, for the annual auditing. And that's okay. And I'd have to go back to the budget notes, which I don't have in front of me, to identify the other professional services that accounts for. But it does include the auditing services, which usually are about $8,500, and any other professional services that the commission does anticipate entering into a relationship to receive those services.
So is it general practice to put the auditing inside of an other category? I mean, is that standard to have it inside there? Because I look at the $8,500 and I'm like, what is that? I mean, it's a large amount to just throw into another category.
Right, and that, these are the county's account codes. These aren't developed by LAFCo, and the county mandates what type of expenses are to be included in these account codes. So it's their account codes that say, yeah, this is where the the auditing amount should be included. And again, that $8,500 does reflect the cost of this last audit.
So given that statement, does the county then care for this budget in the preparation of it, or in the?
We prepare it, they review it to make sure that it's consistent with county policies as far as budgeting.
But
and
LAFCo's not a county agency, right?
No, but the commission contracts with the county to provide auditor and controller services and accounting functions, as well as the financial management system that we use to track our budget, to pay our expenses, is the county's financial management system.
Perhaps in another category, when it's large like that, you might want to throw it in a note so we can specifically identify it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay.
With that, I'll move.
Any other questions? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Janice Parvin moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Ramirez, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Now we come to item 8, LAFCO 1607, City of Ventura Reorganization, North Bank.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, this is agenda item number 8. It's LAFCO 1607. It is a City of Ventura reorganization request that we've called North Bank. This item was continued from the February 15th meeting. Now, I'm going to be going over a lot of information for general topic areas. Please feel free to interrupt me with any questions on that topic so I can answer those. And please bear with me, I'm still trying to get over a cold. Just a little bit of background about the proposal. It is a reorganization. It contains a number of requested changes of organization.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Madam Chair, I know that we're going to be discussing the Watershed Protection District and also Satakoy Sand. So I'm wondering, questions may come up, and I'd rather have them here in the hearing room. I don't know if they are here or not, but I think that those were two very important topics from the last hearing, and I'd like to have them in the room if possible.
Staff from Satakoy Sanitary District is here. I don't see staff from the Watershed Protection District.
Perhaps we can give him a ring.
I'm sorry?
Perhaps we can give him a ring and have it come back. Or over.
Rochelle, could you perhaps call Sergio and ask him if he's going to?
He could possibly be watching.
Oh, Sergio, if you're watching, can you come? Shall I continue, or? Okay. So the primary change of organization is the annexation to the City of Ventura, and this will allow for the development of 193 residential units. This is a project that the city approved last year, and it's a mix of different types of residences, primarily single-family with some multifamily residential, and it also includes about 5 acres of park space. And the project site's approximately 24 acres in size. The site's located on the city's east end in the community of Satakoy. It abuts city boundaries to the west and to the north, and it's unincorporated county in the community of Satakoy to the east, and then to the south as well is the Santa Clara River. This is just a closer-up view. I'm pushing the button. The slides aren't advancing. Well, anyway, I'll try to move on. The next slide is an aerial view of the project site. It's used for agricultural purposes. There we go. So this is taken as of last year. You see that it is used for agricultural purposes. To the west is existing residential development, and there's residential development here under construction. This is in the city. To the north is the railroad tracks with vacant land to the north. That's also within the city. To the east, this is the Brown Barranca. This is a drainage feature that drains area to the north. Across that is the community of Saticoy, and the general plan for the county identifies this as industrial, and there are industrial uses that are there. Down to the south, this is also designated industrial. This is a wastewater treatment plant, and these are percolation ponds associated with the treatment plant. The Santa Clara River is located here. This is the approved subdivision map for the project. This is all single-family residential development here, multifamily residential development, apartments here, and these larger lots are multifamily as well. These are townhomes. There's a park located down here near the sewer treatment plant, and there's a lineal park running along the length of the proposal area here. It's about 40 to 60 feet wide. A little bit of background. This application was first submitted to LAFCo in September of 2016, so we've been processing it for about 6 months. In October, LAFCO staff deemed the application incomplete, and we requested additional information primarily pertaining to the 4 subject areas that we're going to be talking about today. The commission had requested that we provide it with a status update on the project, so at the November 16th LAFCO meeting, we did provide that update. The commission discussed several topics and expressed some concerns related to those same 4 general areas: water supply, flooding, impacts to the Saticoy Sanitary District, and also potential land use conflicts. It was at that time that the city also submitted a letter responding to the determination of incompleteness. Staff processed the application and returned to the commission at the February meeting. The commission considered the proposal, and it determined to continue the matter to a future meeting. And it again expressed concerns over these 4 issues, these 4 issue areas, and specifically requested that additional information be provided to address these concerns. Again, water supply, flooding, impacts to Saticoy Sanitary District, and then potential land use conflicts. On March 31st, just about 3 weeks ago, the city submitted additional information trying to address the concerns that LAFCO expressed at the February meeting. So you'll notice that the staff report prepared for this meeting, as well as my presentation, is going to focus only on those 4 issue areas that the commission asked for additional information. The remainder of the analysis for this proposal was non-controversial, and it's contained in the February 15th staff report, which is attached to your staff report for today's meeting, and that does contain a more extensive discussion of many of these issues. So we'll start with water supply. This table represents a number of reports prepared by the city regarding water supply and demand, and this is during normal years. And I just want to emphasize here that these numbers come from city reports. These are not LAFCO staff generated. We did not come up with them. These come straight out of reports that were provided by the city. And we'll start with, there's the 2009 Community Plan EIR. That's the basis for the environmental document for this project. That plan was adopted in 2009. There's the 2015 City Urban Water Management Plan. This was adopted by the city last year. There's the 2016 Comprehensive Water Resources Report, which was adopted by the city last year. And then the 2017 Comprehensive Water Resources Report. This is new information. This is in draft form. It was just released by city staff a month or 2 ago, and it was considered by the city's Water Commission last month, and they recommended that it be approved at the city council. So this is the latest information prepared by city staff. you'll notice in all of the, these are the conclusions of these documents based on supply and current demand, basically what's being used right now. The EIR estimated that there would be an available supply of over 5,000 acre feet. However, the Urban Water Management Plan reduced that, and they estimate that by 2020, the available supply would be reduced to 1,500 acre feet. The 2016 Comprehensive Water Resources Report estimates that for this year, there would be an available 2,000 or so acre feet up to close to 4,000. And then the most recent report shows that a reduction from the last report of an available 954 to about 2,813 acre feet. Now, again, these are water supply compared to current demand. The city has also approved a number of development projects that haven't yet been built, but for which a water supply has been allocated. So they have a legal right to city water at this point. When you factor in those additional allocations, under the 2009 EIR, there'd be an available supply of 4,571. But for 2020, the 2015 Urban Water Management Plan, the available water supply is reduced to 142 acre feet. The 2016 Comprehensive Water Resources Report, that's reduced to 693 to about 2,500 acre feet available. And now this is new. In the 2017 Comprehensive Water Resources Report, it estimates that for 2018, there is a scenario where the city has already exceeded its water supply, where it's already allocated out allocations beyond its available supply. And there's also a scenario where there could be 1,400 acre feet left. So that's under normal circumstances. Now here's the same table with the information from the same reports. However, this is under drought circumstances. And you'll see here there's no data for the EIR, but the Urban Water Management Plan estimates that supply and current demand, again, without those additional allocations factored in, there's a deficit of 2,645 acre feet in 2020. The 2016 Comprehensive Water Resources Report estimates for this year there's a deficit of anywhere from 24 acre feet to 1,833. And again, the 2017 report estimates that there's going to be a deficit of supply from 606 to 2,500 for next year. Now, when you add in the additional allocations that have already been given out, the numbers, the deficits increase. For over 4,000 under the Urban Water Management Plan, 1,384 to about 3,200 under the 2016 report, and close to 2,000 to 3,800 under the 2017 Comprehensive Water Resources Report. Now, this is under the drought conditions, and Ventura County remains under moderate drought, according to the U.S. Drought Monitor, as of April 4th, and the city remains under a stage 3 drought emergency, which is mandatory 20% reduction. So the city is under the drought conditions. So at this point, this would be the applicable numbers. And again, these are city documents. These are city reports. So the commission expressed concern and did ask for additional information to demonstrate that the city does have an available water supply, a timely, adequate, and available water supply. The city's response included a March 28th letter from the general manager of Ventura Water that was addressed to the community development director. And the letter notes that there will be about 10 acre feet of groundwater rights that the proponents own that's going to be transferred to the city. This will decrease the increase in demand from this project from 67 acre feet to about 57 acre feet. And the letter goes on to summarize the conclusions of the EIR addendum, but it doesn't come out and say that the city has an adequate water supply to meet current demand and this project. So as of the writing of this staff report, the only information that staff had was that the city has not confirmed that they have an adequate water supply, and that the documents that we were able to obtain appear to show that the city does not, in fact, have an adequate water supply. Flood impacts.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I have a question before we move on. Okay, thank you. So at the last hearing, the request was that the city demonstrate using new information for water supply, and that our factor for consideration is the timely availability of water, and then to certify a long-term adequate water supply. That's what we asked of them at the last hearing. So my question is, I'm not a water expert, my question is, on the 2017 Comprehensive Water Resources Report, is that the certification that the city uses to determine the long-term adequate water supply?
The Comprehensive Water Resources Report is what the city uses to determine short-term water supply. The Urban Water Management Plan is more of the long-term water supply document. And both documents show that there is a deficit under drought conditions. The Urban Water Management Plan goes out to 2025. They're still showing a deficit under drought conditions in 2025. That's not reflected here, but that's in the Urban Water Management Plan. Now, just a little bit of background. The Comprehensive Water Resources Report that the city is preparing, this started in 2013. And this was a direct result of the determinations that the commission made when it approved the municipal service review that was prepared for the city. Now, back in 2012, the city's water supply was determined that it probably would not be able to meet the anticipated demand under the city's general plan. Those were the conclusions of that municipal service review and the findings that were adopted by the commission. It was in response to that the city council then determined that we need to get a better handle and understanding of our water supply. And so they required Ventura Water to start preparing these annual updates to water supply. And so that's the reason that they are doing these comprehensive water resources report, because the commission had expressed concerns over supply over 5 years ago.
So during the last hearing, too, it said that the city would meet with you and talk about all of these issues. So I'm wondering, when did you have the meetings and to discuss these 4 issues?
Well, we met in late February to talk about the flood issues, city staff, watershed protection staff, and LAFCo staff. We didn't meet about the water, but I was in contact with the city's planning manager, asking them, when we can expect some response to the water issue or all of the issues. So there was some correspondence there. The Watershed Protection District reached out to the city separately outside of LAFCo staff to try to work out that issue. And as far as the Sataquai Sanitary District, the developer was working, and the city, my understanding, directly with the Sataquai Sanitary District to try to resolve those issues. So I just waited for the outcome of those meetings.
So you had one meeting, but it was only about the flood issues?
One,
And you didn't have an in-person meeting with the city other than that?
with the city, no. Had another meeting with Watershed Protection, and then had phone calls with Sataquai Sanitary District and Watershed Protection. But aside from that, no, it really was the city working on how it was going to address these issues.
Okay, and so you're saying that the city has not come back with a certified long-term adequate water supply for this project?
Yeah, the city has not demonstrated that it has a long-term adequate water supply to meet demand.
Madam Chair. So Kai, so what we need from the city is for them to say that they do have adequate water supply regardless of what they're projecting for the future.
I would think so. Now it's really up to the commission to determine what is sufficient for the commission to feel comfortable that they've demonstrated that. I would think that, in my opinion, had I gotten a letter from the general manager of Ventura Water confirming that, yes,
They do
we
underline, we do have adequate supply.
Right, we do have adequate to provide for this project and to meet existing demand. That would have sufficed. That hasn't happened, and I think actually we made reference to that at the February meeting, that just a letter flat out confirming would suffice, but we haven't seen that.
I think we have an alternative in that
Yes.
LAFCo can condition
That's
that letter.
There's options there, but I just want to sure that's what you needed
Yeah, and
to recommend to our board.
had I had that, my recommendation may very well have been different. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Kai, it was either in the staff report or an additional document that I received, was a letter from someone, and they described these water reports or the calculations as back of the napkin calculations. Do you have any feeling if the city would disagree with the way these numbers have been laid out on this slide here?
No, these come from the city.
These are from the city
Right,
reports.
and I've been presenting this information for, going on over about 2 years. The information that I presented has never been questioned. No one has said, no, that's just not accurate. These come directly from reports that were prepared by the city. And these reports they're presented in such a way to be understandable to the layperson. These are going to city councils for consideration. They're intended to be understood by the average person. They're not difficult to understand, but they're pretty straightforward. And this represents the information from those.
Commissioner Ramirez?
I just want to know if someone is going to speak later from the city addressing that issue. Is anyone here from the city?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
If also in terms of the background on this, I recall from our last meeting, it was stated that they're looking at a new imported water source. Can you address that?
I can't. I know that they're looking at trying to, let me back up. The city has a contract for state water, several thousand acre feet. It's never received it because there's never been a way for that water to get transported to the city. The city is now looking into constructing a pipeline, about a 7-mile pipeline that would hook into Callegas's distribution system and essentially reach an agreement with Callegas to wheel that state water through Callegas's system and then back to the city. This scenario was not evaluated in the city's urban water management plan, as I recall. So it's not accounted for in that. I don't know the status. I don't know whether it's been funded. Environmental review has not occurred, and so I don't know where that stands as of now.
Perhaps staff can address that, city staff.
Sure.
After your presentation.
Any other questions?
Mr. Richards has one.
Yeah.
Kai, on your chart under additional allocations, there's a stagnant line, 1360, across several years. Are those all projects that have been approved by the city? And are there other pending projects that are waiting approval?
Yes, those are all approved projects for which water has already been given. They have an entitlement to water. That's 1,360. That's as of today. And yes, there are several projects in the works that will require additional water. Some of them may very well likely bring a water supply to the city to offset the increased demand, but undoubtedly there's some in there that won't. And other annexations that this commission has approved for the city, the Parklands specific plan and the UC Hanson Trust, both of these were large-scale residential developments. They brought groundwater with them. They transferred an adequate amount of groundwater to the city to offset their increased demand. This project doesn't do that. This project brings a limited amount of water, 10 acre feet, but it will increase demand on the city's water supply by 57 acre feet per year.
Any other questions? Continue.
Okay. Okay, and staff from the Watershed Protection District is here. Okay, as I mentioned, Brown Barranca flows along the eastern edge of the project site. It's out of the boundaries of the project site, but abutting it. This facility is owned and maintained by the Watershed Protection District. Now, the Watershed Protection District did a study in 2005 and a subsequent study in 2014 that concluded that Brown Barranca does not have the capacity to convey floodwaters from a 100-year flood. And they concluded that 2/3 of the floodwater coming down the Barranca would overflow the banks and come across the project site. Now, in the opinion of the Watershed Protection District staff, the best way to address this flooding is to expand the capacity of the Barranca so that it conveys the floodwater down to the Santa Clara River and it doesn't enter the site at all. Now, the city has approached it in a different manner. The city does acknowledge that there's a potential flood risk there. And they are addressing it instead of agreeing to enlarge this facility. They propose to grade the linear park so that it acts as a secondary flood channel, so that any floodwaters coming over from Brown Branca would be conveyed down this channel as well. And then additional floodwaters would be accommodated by on-site storm drainage. Now, what this is going to result in is basically two parallel channels, both conveying floodwaters. Now, initially, the Watershed Protection District was opposed to this idea. However, it does appear, based on their latest comments, that they have backed off and that they're willing to consider the city's solution to the flooding. But they do have a couple of concerns that they would like to be addressed. And again, this is just based on conversations with Watershed. They're here, they can clarify. The first concern is that if there is a flood control channel going down the backside of their facility, there is a potential for those floodwaters to erode the backside of the Watershed Protection District's bank of the Branca. So this has the potential to both damage their facility, but if it gets bad enough that the bank fails, then that's just going to add additional floodwaters coming out of the Brown Branca onto the site. So the district would like to review the grading plans, the final plans, to determine whether their facility will be adversely impacted or not. So that was their first concern and their first request. The second is that if this is acting as a secondary channel to convey floodwaters from Brown Branca, it might meet the definition of a jurisdictional channel of the Watershed Protection District. The Watershed Protection District was formed under special legislation, so they have an enabling act under state law. And there's a definition of what constitutes a jurisdictional channel. And staff is concerned that if it's designed to function as it's proposed, it might mean that it becomes a jurisdiction of the Watershed Protection District. It's not now, but it will become under this project. So and if that's the case, then the project needs a permit from the Watershed Protection District. So the Watershed Protection District asked that they be given the authority to determine if the final design does in fact meet the definition of their jurisdiction, and they determine whether the city or the applicant, whomever it is, has to come to them for a permit. So those were the concerns expressed by the Watershed Protection District, and this is just a summary of them. At the February meeting with the city, the Watershed Protection District staff did ask for that authority. However, the city, they didn't agree with that. They did not want to relinquish the authority to determine Watershed's jurisdiction, essentially. They were happy to provide the district with the plans to review, but they did not want to relinquish the authority to make those determinations. So after that meeting, Watershed Protection District staff developed a proposed condition of approval, and they submitted that to the city. They wanted the city's agreement to it before they moved forward. This was about 3 weeks ago or so. The city had not responded until just yesterday. I received a letter from Tully Clifford, the Public Works Manager, and that was in your packet of letters that you had. We sent it to you yesterday. And the letter basically says that the city believes that the current conditions of approval that the city has imposed on the project adequately address flooding, and that the proposed language of the proposed condition leaves the jurisdictional question open to interpretation. And that is accurate because the Watershed Protection District is essentially asking for the right to that interpretation. And again, the city did commit to work collaboratively with the Watershed Protection District regarding flooding. Yes?
And you're right. I have the letter here from Tully.
Right.
Tully Clifford says that the city, that meets the city's 100-year protection plan. Is that suffice of what we, and he says he's willing to work with the Watershed Protection?
Well, I don't want to speak for the Watershed Protection District. The last I heard from them is they would like basically LAFCo to entertain this condition of approval.
Mm-hmm.
The city obviously doesn't want that condition of approval, and I haven't heard back from Watershed Protection District about their response to the city's response.
I have a legal question, sorry. That is that it sounds like there's already law in place that if they deem it is part of their jurisdiction, then they shall give a permit. Is the law specific that it allows for the Watershed Protection District to unilaterally determine that it is within their jurisdiction?
I believe at this point, the answer I can give is that the Watershed Protection District would make the initial call on that. I don't know what process would flow from that initial decision as to whether there's any hearing that flows from that, or if that is the decision, and then it would have to be challenged through some other process if a jurisdiction disagreed with it.
Madam Chair. So at our last hearing, the suggestion was brought up by Commissioner Parks that if it is within the jurisdiction of the watershed, then they need to get a permit. And as I read that, quote from the city, says it determines that they'll apply for a permit from the district if it applies. So I feel like the city met what we asked of them to do, in this regard. I feel uncomfortable with you talking for the watershed when we've got the watershed people here in the room that they make the determination from a LAFCo perspective. The applicant did what we requested and gave you certification on that.
If you look through the process, when the final engineering is done and the final grading plan is done, that will indicate impacts that may not be known right now. So since the city has agreed to going along with what was just stated, if they've agreed when they do the final engineering and do plan check and find there is an impact, they agree to go to the Watershed Protection District. I would think that would satisfy our concern.
Yeah, I haven't heard the response from Watershed Protection, what they're, this is just as of yesterday.
I mean, the concept being the city isn't going to move forward if they don't find it. I mean, should they find a problem, they're going to go to the Watershed Protection District. That's what I get from Mr. Tully's letter.
And what I read from that condition, it's kind of a preamble, is the first couple of sentences. The operative is the last sentence. If the district determines that the project may have the effect, the city or the developer shall apply for a permit.
Yeah.
The city doesn't agree to that. And I think that's what we're saying up here is, if the district finds out it's going to affect their jurisdiction, they need a permit. And the city doesn't agree to that. I mean, I'd be glad to get rid of the whole, preamble to that, which is...
the bottom line is...
Yeah, and so they're not agreeing to what I think we had
But
requested.
I think let's hear from the city
Okay,
and the
sure.
applicant.
Okay, continue? Okay. Okay, Saticoy Sanitary District. Again, as explained last time, the Saticoy Sanitary District provides wastewater collection, conveyance, and treatment to the community of Saticoy, which abuts the project. This is the project site right here. And this is just the boundaries of the district. So just a little bit about the operations of the district. The operations, the district has some facilities that extend onto this site. They have their sewer trunk line that connects most of the community to the wastewater treatment plant, comes onto the project site right about here. And it basically runs down. It enters the site, enters the watershed protection, enters the site, and then comes down here and then connects to the treatment plant.
Madam Chair, excuse me.
Yes.
At our last hearing, Mr. Loma said that it sounds like all the issues with Saticoy Sand were addressed.
Yes.
So I'm guessing, I mean, it feels like if they're all addressed, that this conversation on this issue is moot.
Right, but when the city responded, the city agreed to address all of the issues that we were led to believe at the February meeting. And that meant that they were going to make all of these revisions that were agreed to at the January 10th meeting. Now, if you recall, by the February meeting, they had not agreed or included in the revisions these agreed upon items. And that was noted in the February meeting. And it was then that the city and the developer and Saticoy Sanitary District basically agreed, okay, if you add all these revisions in, we're okay. And that's what the city committed to do. That's what the testimony was. But when we received the city's response about the changes, it still didn't include these items. So as of the writing of the staff report, the city had not responded that it agreed to
I have a
these
letter here
revisions.
dated April 19 from Jeff Lambert, and it states that the current Satacoy Sanitation District access road to the treatment facility shall remain in place and shall be made permanent through granting of a permanent easement. This easement shall be shown on the final map for the project. Any portion of the existing sewer pipeline and sewer pipeline easement located within the project site shall remain in place.
Right. And
So that's from the city.
Right, and that was submitted today. I had not seen that before. And before the meeting, I did talk with Satacoy Sanitary District staff, and they said that with these additional changes, if these are incorporated into the project, then they're satisfied.
So that this issue basically, with this condition, settles that issue.
Apparently so, and you probably want to confirm that with
Okay.
Satacoy Sanitary District
Okay.
staff. So I can move on. So, okay, and then the last issue were potential land use conflicts. These were again discussed at the February meeting, and prior to that, again, here's the project. It is adjacent to industrial uses in Satacoy. This is the E.J. Harrison trash truck yard with parking of over 100 trash trucks and other trucks. Early morning operations beginning at 5 o'clock, 7 days a week. There's this metal recycling facility. There's the E.J. Harrison trash bin storage yard. And then this site here, I believe, was just approved for a diesel fueling station for large trucks. The county just approved that use. So there was a number of concerns that were raised by staff, potential concerns. These were about noise, odors, exhaust, vibration, glare, mainly from security lights at these facilities, and just some visual responses or visual impacts. The city responded essentially that the adherence to building codes will reduce the interior noise to these close by residential units, and that the potential noise, odor, and vibration impacts are to be included in a real estate disclosure that would be provided to buyers and renters and occupants. However, they really don't address any way to mitigate these impacts to less than they are, other than just informing the residents. And they don't talk about exhaust. I haven't heard anything about potential impacts from exhaust from the trash truck operation. So,
As part of this same memo, letter, April 19, all attached dwelling units shall be designed in accordance with the minimum noise insulation standards of the California Administrative Code. Part of this regulation provides that an acoustical report addressing exterior noise sources shall be submitted with the dwelling construction plans for approved by the building official, and that between the sanitation district and the project, a 200-foot buffer between the SSD tank and the residential structure shall be maintained and shown on the final plans. That's from this.
right, yeah, and I refer that to adherence to the building codes will reduce the interior noise.
I have a question again. When we had this discussion at our last meeting, I wasn't keyed in on is it a metal recycling plant? What does that do?
These are large piles of scrap metal, and these piles are 40, 50 feet sometimes. I know that code enforcement, the county's code enforcement is out there routinely trying to address these. There's some large cranes and other heavy equipment for the loading and unloading of these, and then there's a large metal compactor, that's compacting these things. So that's what that operation is. It's an outdoor, large-scale metal recycling facility. These aren't aluminum cans. These are, big pieces of
I would imagine that makes some noise too, the metal compactors.
I would think so.
Madam Chair, so who's going to issue the disclosures, the real estate disclosures? Is that the city or the developer?
My understanding is that it will be from the initial sellers and renters, right? But the real estate disclosure will have to be reviewed and approved by the city to make sure it meets all of their requirements.
As part of the purchase contract, and
My understanding, the
Yeah.
city staff will probably be better able to answer that question.
I would assume be part of the rental agreement as well?
rental or
It may
purchase,
very
yeah.
well be, yeah.
Also, at the last meeting, we did raise concerns with the exhaust diesel emissions, and wondering if we have anything to report on that. And then also the noise, we understood that the noise readings were at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, not when the Harrison trucks are all starting up and at 5 in the morning, or when they all come back at 3 or whatever. Was there anything done to get us more information on either one of those?
No,
Okay.
no.
I
I
think
did
the city's letter
contact.
did say that there'll be noise studies. I'm looking for it.
Additional noise studies
And
in the 2
additional
o'clock one.
noise studies.
So we didn't receive it, they didn't do any noise studies during the time when the trucks start up, from our last meeting to this meeting. We didn't get information from APCD, for example, about what happens when 100 dump trucks all start
Right.
up.
No,
What
we didn't
kind of
receive any,
emissions?
no additional information about the noise impacts prior to 7 in the morning. And 7 is the cutoff. That's when the city's standards are reduced, that noise above 45 decibels is acceptable after 7. It's not acceptable before 7 o'clock. And of course, the Harrison Truck Yard starts operations at 5.
5 a.m.
So that wasn't addressed. And then as far as the exhaust, APCD, I did ask for their input. They were not aware of the project. They never reviewed the environmental document or the project. But they did apparently contact the city and realize this has already been approved, that it really is too late for them to provide any meaningful comment. But they did indicate to me that they still have concerns that people there are going to register complaints about exhaust and or odors.
Is that concern letter in our packet?
It's an email. I don't know that it is in your packet.
Okay, so you didn't include their concerns in our staff
Yeah,
report?
it was just a short email, just a couple of sentences.
Well, but I mean, even a short email, you're saying that they have concerns about it. So, I mean, an agency having concerns, that's, no matter how
Right.
short it is, I think it's appropriate.
Well, I did
in the staff
include
report.
what their conclusion was in the staff report.
And that's a new issue brought up from this,
I'm sorry?
that's new from this agency. This is new comments from them.
Yes.
I have a question, Madam Chair. The map that we're using today, the proposed development map, is that the most current plan map that we show? Because we've had the old one in there previously, so I'm wondering, is that the most current development plan map?
As far as I know, that was the one that was acted on by the Planning Commission, and they were the approval authority of it. So as far as I know, it's the most recent.
Madam Chair, so with the condition about 200 feet from the sanitation district, that map shows multi-unit properties within 200 feet or beyond 200 feet?
Just beyond. The Sataquai Sanitary District initially indicated that they would prefer a buffer of about 300 feet. And throughout this process, there was some confusion in that the developer was informing the Sataquai Sanitary District that they did provide a 300-foot buffer. And initially, Sataquai Sanitary District wasn't as concerned because they were under the impression that there was a 300-foot buffer. When we sat down at that meeting to go over the agreements, at that time, they still believed there was a 300-foot buffer. But when we sat down, I scaled it out for them and said, no, it's closer to 200 feet. So that was a concern of the Sataquai Sanitary District, and that's when they started asking for, well, if it's closer than 300 feet, we'd like additional screening, we'd like, the wall or some way to mitigate noise, 24-hour noise from the pumps, et cetera. So it's not a condition of approval that there be 200 feet, that's just how the project was designed. So there's about a 210-foot distance from the wastewater treatment plant to the multifamily and also to the single family.
There's a condition that the city has to construct a wall and a 15-foot landscape buffer. Does that wall run the full length?
My understanding, the concern of the watershed protection, the Sataquai Sanitary District was noise attenuation. So as far as noise attenuation, I know that they agreed to build the wall here and here. Now, I've seen plans where the wall continues on over here as well, but that's going to be an agreement between the...
You don't know if there's a wall along the buffer on the other side of the trail?
On the other side of
On the
here?
residential, no.
Oh, yeah, no, there's a buffer, there would be a wall here and here.
No,
and then a
along
15-foot,
the barranca.
yeah, landscape. No, there's no wall along the barranca.
There's just the,
Just the landscaping.
just landscaping.
in New York Park.
At a minimum that I'm aware of, there's a wall here and here,
No.
and landscaping outside that wall. That's at a minimum that I'm aware of. I have seen plans where there's also a wall being constructed here, and I don't know about
Maybe staff can address
over
the
here.
question.
Absolutely. Okay. So again, this is just a summary of the issues that we talked about. And based on the information that was available to...
Could you go back to the slide before?
Sure.
I just want to make sure we're all on the same page here. So, I mean, in the summary, the impacts to the operation, the Saticoy sand, they have been resolved.
It appears now, yes. When I wrote this, we didn't have the information that was presented today. So this was as of the writing of the staff report a week ago. So yes, I would think that if Saticoy Sanitary District staff confirms that they're okay with the changes, then I think that issue probably is resolved.
Okay?
Okay? So based on that, the recommendation is that the commission adopt a resolution making determinations and disapproving the reorganization. Now, knowing that the city is hopefully going to be providing additional information to the commission today to give the commission a level of comfort with perhaps approving the project, information that wasn't provided to to staff when we were making our recommendation. We did come up with some alternative actions available to the commission should circumstances change and the commission have a comfort level of approving the project. The first approval would be adopt a resolution, which is attachment 2. Now, this includes some potential conditions of approval that it would address the flood impacts by imposing that condition that the Watershed Protection District requested. The Saticoy Sanitary District concerns, it just required that the city amend the project to respond to the concerns expressed by Saticoy Sanitary District, which appear to have happened already. And then water supply, just that the city provide just confirmation that there's a water supply. And then there's a space for any additional conditions that the commission might want to impose. The second option is that there's another approval, a resolution for approval, and the commission can adopt this resolution if it's satisfied now without any additional conditions that it wants to approve the project. It can do that with attachment 3. Or there's space there that if the commission wants to add some additional conditions of approval, we can write that in, get the wording, the specific wording in place. The commission can move to approve, and then LAFCo will prepare a final resolution for the chair's signature later. And then the third option for approval is just direct staff to come back with a resolution of approval consistent with staff's direction at a later meeting and adopt that resolution. And then there's also an option to continue the matter. The staff report says that this option is only available if the city agrees to it. However, Michael is now aware of a court case that said that doesn't apply, that the city does not have to agree to a continuance to any time in the future. So that is an option available to the commission. And that concludes my presentation. So if there's any additional questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
David?
Kai, if this commission moves to disapprove the reorganization, what does that look like going forward for the property owner in the city? What kind of time frame before they can come back and have a new application for the commission to review?
Well, a straight disapproval would mean that the city cannot reapply for a similar proposal for, I think it's 1 year. And if they were to do that, the city could go back and address the concerns and then reapply. And that's an option. The commission could also disapprove, and I may need your help with this, disapprove without prejudice. Is that an option?
I'm not sure if it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I won't go into that. So, yeah, it would be a year before they could reapply.
Madam Chair? There was one statement that you made in there that this area was identified as a duck. And so I'm wondering, how does that factor into the conversation at all?
Well, that's mainly regarding the Sataquoy Sanitary District issues.
Okay.
Because,
Which are resolved?
right.
Okay. So it doesn't play, right?
It's still a duck, but it's really not relevant any longer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And before we go into deliberation, I would rather hear from the city and the applicant to address what their response to the concerns are
Right.
before we deliberate.
I was going to, any more questions of staff?
I just want to ask one question here. On number one, if we'll go with number one, the flood impacts and so forth, how much time does the city have to come back, or do they come back if we condition that they have the flood impacts in the Sataquoy district and water supply? Do
Well,
they need to come back if we approve something like that?
Mm-hmm.
Condition upon that?
They would have a year. So
Oh.
the conditions are phrased in such a way that they wouldn't prevent the recordation from happening prior to like the final grading plans occurring. They're formulated so that, take for instance, Watershed Protection District, that the city and the Watershed Protection District enter into an agreement. And then there's the provisions of that agreement. And then they meet the condition by showing that agreement to me, the executive officer. And then that condition is met. It can be recorded. The city can move forward with the grading, et cetera. And then it becomes it's now the responsibility of the Watershed Protection District to make sure that the city adheres to that agreement. It's out of LAFCo's hands.
But they can continue working with...
Right, yeah. Because it's an agreement, that means that it just the agreement's in
Condition.
place, it gets recorded, they can keep moving along with the project.
Okay.
And I have a couple questions also. The zoning on this property, to me, when we're talking about compatibility of land uses, that's basically all we've been discussing today is what is it going to be like for the residents living there. If it were something like industrial, if it were commercial office space, where people aren't living there 24 hours a day and smelling and hearing the noise and all that kind of stuff, how would that play out if that concern is addressed because it is a different type of land use? How would they be able to move forward on something like that where you don't have the incompatibility issues?
Well, I mean, the commission still has to consider, land use designations and impacts from land use. The impacts that were identified here are primarily because the sensitive receptors that are introduced from residential uses. If it were an office project or light industrial or something else where those sensitive receptors aren't there, these land use conflicts, for the most part, go away. Mm-hmm. Now, you still have the water issue, you still have the flood issue, and the Sataquoy sanitary issue, but the land use conflicts really are a function of the land use that's being introduced there.
So, but I'm just thinking from a planning perspective, land use perspective, the zoning is what it is right now, and you can tell us what that is, and then what they would have to do to rezone the land if it were to be, if they wanted to address the compatibility.
Well, the city
issue.
would have to change their general plan and change the underlying zoning to allow for any additional use or different use. That's up to the city.
That's correct. Yeah, the city would have to amend its general plan and change the pre-zoning of the property to allow for a different development, different type of land use. The conflicts between residential and industrial, oftentimes they can be addressed. To sound walls, barriers to lighting, additional landscaping, that kind of thing. But it all depends on the type of industrial use that it's adjacent to. In this case, the city hasn't identified, what these measures are to reduce these impacts or adjust these impacts.
Okay.
It's interesting in terms of land use, and I'm going to divert a little bit here, but with the advent of infill and the desire to have higher density and less commute, it's actually on a land use is being promoted to put residential near industrial and have things compact. I mean, you see it in Camarillo and other cities where the industrial and the residential are put close together, and it's because we have limited land available, we have to be more compact.
And certainly some industrial uses are a lot more noxious than others.
Yeah,
and that's where you have zoning and public health
Right. But I mean,
laws.
it's something we're going to see more of, I think.
Well, certainly. And the other question I had is, there was a mention in the report on environmental justice. That I don't know if that's a CEQA requirement or if there are any, we haven't had any discussions on that, but I don't know how that would relate.
That is under CEQA, but it's also a specific factor that you're to consider under LAFCo law. And that was mainly regarding the Sataquai Sanitary District impacts. That initially, as approved, this project was really going to adversely affect their ability to provide adequate and efficient sewer service to this disadvantaged unincorporated community. And that becomes an issue of environmental justice. However, because these issues appear to have been resolved, it really no longer is an issue.
Okay. It's not a factor of putting low-income people in an area where they are environmentally affected?
Not necessarily,
Okay.
yeah, not from LAFCo's perspective.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, was that during the EIR process? That should have been,
That was not addressed in the EIR.
but that should have at the time.
Right, our comment letters did bring up the issue of environmental justice, specifically about the impacts to the Sataquai Sanitary District, but they were not addressed in the... Yeah.
Any other question? Yes, Commissioner Richards.
Under item number 1, you have 3 items identified. Was the issue regarding the potential or land use conflicts resolved, I guess due to the April 19th letter?
No, it was just, I couldn't think of any conditions that the commission could impose that would address those issues. And that's why actually I have a blank space for any additional conditions that the commission might develop to address those issues. Again, if they rise to the level of the commission wanting to address them.
Okay, just on that note alone, on the April 19th correspondence that we received from the city, they're attending that the disclosure is only identifying 3 of the 6 items that you had identified in yours. I just wanted to make that notation. So.
Yeah, absolutely, and if it's the pleasure of the commission, they could ask that it be expanded to include the other items. And that I guess would at least make future occupants aware of the additional potential impacts.
Yeah, he makes a good point of how do you mitigate the impacts of having incompatible land uses, and one of those that I am most concerned with is the diesel emissions. I don't know if the trucks could have. I really don't know if the trucks what kind of how they are powered, but there are clean ways of using for trash trucks and all. I know that APCD looks at funding the conversion to clean energy sources. So I don't have any information. I'm just assuming they're diesel emissions. We have trash trucks coming in front of all our houses, and we all can smell the fumes and all that kind of stuff. But to me, that would be a potential for a mitigation if they weren't polluting in that area.
Chair Freeman?
Yes.
Over here, Chair Freeman.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Michael.
If I may elaborate in response to the question that Commissioner Ross asked about what happens if there is a disapproval of the project. Under LAFCo law, it says that if it's wholly disapproved, no further proceedings can be taken on this proposal. And then I'll read verbatim the language in LAFCo law. As to the other condition, it says, no, excuse me, no similar proposal involving the same or substantially the same territory shall be initiated for 1 year after the date the proposal is denied. Then with respect to the idea of whether the commission could disapprove without prejudice, the section says that you can essentially waive that one-year limitation if the commission finds that that requirement is detrimental to the public interest. So you would have to make that finding in order to waive that one-year restriction on bringing back a similar proposal.
Thank you.
Actually, would waive that whole thing, so you could actually disapprove it without prejudice to bringing back the same proposal if you make the finding that that sort of restriction would be detrimental to the public interest.
But they could also bring forward one that isn't the same proposal anytime they want. It's just they can't do the similar one.
And that would be the discussion of what it means for is a proposal a similar proposal or not.
Right, so if
The
it
law
were-
says you can't bring back a similar proposal within that one-year period.
Right, so if it were industrial or office space, that would definitely not be similar.
That would seem to be on the other side of the bright line, to the extent there is a bright line, yes.
Commissioner Ramirez?
I just want to clarify, I'm looking at the letter that was received today, signed by Mr. Lambert, and I'm not 100% because I've got a cold, but I'm looking and looking and looking. I don't see anything about the water here. Is there anything else about the water supply?
I talked to city staff before the hearing today, and they indicated they do not have any additional information about the water.
The Ventura City staff,
Mhm.
and I want to know if we're going to get something in writing from Ventura City Water. Well, they're here, right?
Yes.
So they'll address it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I don't know if city water's here, but city staff is here.
So essentially, this letter is about design, gutter sidewalks, landscaping, buffer zone, et cetera. Right?
Mhm.
That's what it's, okay, thank you.
Kai, has the applicant already paid fees for reviewing this application? Are you familiar with that?
To LAFCo?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, yeah, we would collect an application fee.
If the commission did move to disapprove, they would be required to pay a new set of fees with the new application?
We exceeded the initial deposit, and we requested that additional funds be deposited from the city a while ago, so they did submit additional funds. We will, once we figure out all of the amount of staff time that's been spent on this, we will deduct that amount from the deposit. If there's money left over, we'll refund that. If there is additional money that needs to be collected, then we'll send out a bill.
Madam Chair, again, I'd like to request that we hear from the city staff and applicant before we deliberate further.
Right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you go back to the site plan where it shows their plan and then the neighborhood next door? Do you have one that shows the neighborhood next door?
Yeah, there.
Okay, so there's already homes built over there, right?
Yes.
On the left side, okay.
These are existing, and
And
these are
then
under
those are
construction.
feature approved?
Yeah, these are under construction now.
Okay. All right, so all right, that's what I wanted to see. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Okay.
At this time, I will open the public hearing. I have 30 cards, but 2 are comment cards, and then I will read their names. Nancy Kimball, who supports the annexation, and
Excuse me.
Sean Provosky, who supports the annexation.
Madam Chair, could we hear from city staff and
Yeah,
the
I wanna
applicant
get
before
this
we
on the
have the
record.
public comments? And I don't think that we should restrict the time that the applicant and city staff have to respond to this issue.
I have 3 cards, Jeff Barrett, Edna Ennis, and Marie Barrett, who want to give their time to Lori Baroni. And I have 5 cards who, from Charles Baroni, Vanoni, excuse me, Richard Atchley, Mary Vanoni, Laura Bijan, and Charlie Vanoni, and they are giving their time to Charles, and they support the annexation. And with that, I will call Jeff Lambert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jeff Lambert, Community Development Director for the City of Ventura. Well, I first want to say how happy we are to finally be here with an action on the table. Unfortunately, it's not the action we had hoped for. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about where we are. I also want to note that I think you've already talked about there are 2 letters that we have provided to the Commission, one from our Director of Public Works, former head of your Watershed Protection District, Tully Clifford, in response to the Watershed Protection District's most recent request for a condition. And then second, a letter signed by me, which really responds to some of the technical changes. I want to make it clear what that letter signed by me is that was delivered to you today. That is really a modification to the project that we've completed, assuming that you take action to approve the annexation. So I want to assure you that those conditions that we've put in the modification will be in effect the day that you complete the annexation. So I want to make sure it's clear that that's actually happening. It's not a promise for some future action. It's done, assuming that you annex the project today, and hopefully you will. I also want to sort of set the stage a little bit. This has been a sort of a moving target for the city. We've been at this for a couple of years, and it seems like every time we come to the Commission, there are new issues that we have to sort of resolve. I do appreciate that the Commission, in your February meeting, pretty much said there are 4 issues you want to hear more about. And I appreciate this time that we actually tried to focus on those 4 issues without new ones coming to the table. I also want to make note, I have 2 city staff here, Brad Starr from our Public Works Department. I think you heard from him last time in February, and Jared Rosengren, who's been our case planner on this project. So if you get into technical questions, I might defer to them to help answer some of those questions. I also want to start by saying what the city wants. I want to be really clear with the Commission what we expect from the Commission today, and what we expect is the Commission to approve a resolution that approves this annexation without any additional conditions. And I think that's attachment 3 in your staff report that Mr. Lomomo put up on the screen. That's what we expect today, and we believe that's appropriate given the amount of responses that the city has provided to staff up until recently as early as today. I also then want to go through the 4 bases that staff used to recommend a denial of this annexation and provide some brief responses to each of those. I might call some other folks to go into a little bit more detail. And the first is I really want to talk about the adjacent issues, because I think that was really a key critical discussion point that I've heard you all talk about for the last hour or so in previous meetings. I want to start by saying this property has been zoned for this use for decades. And the city's been very deliberate in that zoning, and I want to tell you why. And I think Commissioner Parman, when you asked for that last aerial, actually tells the story that I was going to tell. Yes, it's true that this property, should it be developed as residential, will be across the Barranca, hundreds of feet from industrial uses, admittedly relatively toxic industrial uses, but if this property is not used for residential, it will be directly adjacent to the backyards of existing homes and an existing project that's currently under construction and frankly selling very well to young families in our community. So we're not going to avoid conflicts if we don't approve residential on this site. But I also think we did this deliberately to put residential on this property because it has a built-in buffer from industrial uses. The project was designed with a built-in buffer by putting all the residential as far away from the Barranca as possible, putting a green belt along the Barranca that can be planted and mitigate some of those issues. It has a built-in buffer with the existing Barranca. And I think any alternative use of this property will create, I think, worse land use conflicts on the other side of this project than this one does. So I wanted to make that clear from the beginning. And I heard comments that the city really did not respond to the concerns about the land use conflicts. And I want to be clear, we've been responding to those issues for a long time because the project itself has been designed to minimize those conflicts. If you look at the land plan that you've seen on the screen, admittedly it's a track map, so you don't see all the nuances of the design, but the project has been very meticulously designed. The single-family homes are as far away from the Barranca as possible. The multifamily for rent is closer to the Barranca. We've incorporated, as you see in the letter, confirmation that we'll do all the noise studies necessary, the acoustical studies that are built into the project design. So these units will be built in such a way to make sure that they're adequately mitigated for any of those kind of impacts. So I think we've addressed that issue as best as we possibly can, and it's not something that the city went in lightly. We've been looking at this site and how it should be developed for a very, very long time. I should also note that we've gone through a couple of sphere of influence amendments, and this property has not been changed from its current designation through that process. I want to hold flood and watershed protection to last because I want Brad Starr from our Public Works Department to come up and answer many of those questions.
Mr.
But I want to talk about
can
water.
I ask you a question?
Sure, yeah.
On the, as far as the neighborhood that's close to it on the
Yeah.
south,
Mhm.
has the city been receiving complaints about noise from that neighborhood relative to the industrial area?
No, we have not.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's not too far away from that
Yeah,
area. I just
yeah.
wanted to know if you're receiving any calls. And were those residents notified in advance of the industrial uses near their property, or did you think that the city didn't notify them because there was a larger distance?
It probably was, many of those industrial properties were there before the homes,
Okay.
is my guess.
So the
Yeah.
people that are currently buying the new homes that are being built, do you think they drive around to see what's near them?
I would. I can't tell you every buyer does. I think, as you know, we're always surprised when somebody buys a home and then
Wow,
wonders
there's
what
a dump next door to
There's
me.
an airport next to me. I didn't know there was an airport there.
There's a
so.
train. I'm sorry, there's
Yeah.
a truck
I
stop.
would say this is a pretty obvious site. You can see what's happening across the way. And I also just want to also make the point that this proposed project and the one under construction were actually developed together. They were designed to work together. The park space was designed to go across both properties. So that park amenity will only be half delivered if we don't see both projects come together. And it ultimately is a 5-acre community park for our
Are the
Santa Cruz community.
streets working together?
Yes, they actually, both projects have been redesigned so that they actually work together. Yeah. And I would say this project actually started their entitlement process earlier, but the annexation has caused delay. The other one's now well under construction. They have about 12 phases, and I think we've just permitted their phase 8 or 9. So they're very far along in the completion of that project.
Thank you.
Sure. I want to talk about water. Clearly, that's a concern. It's obviously a concern of the city. I first want to say you do have a letter from the Water Department, from Shauna Epstein, who's our immediate past general manager of Ventura Water, and that letter is in your material, was actually provided and dated March 28th. And this might be a nuance that maybe needs some explanation, but at the bottom of the first page, Shauna says, the discussion explains, she refers to the original EIR and the addendum, which is the only environmental document we're allowed by law to do on this project. And she refers to that, it says, the discussion explains how adequate water supply exists and the additional requirements available if circumstances change at the time of building permit issuance. That's the answer I think you were looking for. It might not be in the words you were looking for, but what Shauna is saying is we have adequate water supply if you look at the whole of the issue. And what I mean by that is we have the reports that their staff has identified. We also have additional activity that's happening now, and that is we are in the environmental review stage now to develop and acquire land and develop a direct portable reuse plant, one of the most innovative ways of developing water supply in the country. We have a pilot program. I don't know if any of you got a chance to test our pilot water, but it was very successful, and we're now moving forward. We have funding, and we're in the environmental stage to do exactly that. When it talks about our connection to state water, we have funding, and we're in the design stage to make that connection happen. That will happen.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Can I ask a question, maybe Kai, too?
Sure.
Would the word adequate water supply suffice, for the project? I think Mr. Shauna mentioned that in her report.
The factor states a timely, available, and adequate water supply. I believe those are the terms. So that's the factor that the commission must consider to determine.
I was going to go right there to timely, so I'm glad you asked that question. So what I just said, all those pieces that I just talked about, and there's one more I want to cover too, is all about that we are developing the water to time with the demand. We are developing all the supply.
So that's
to
the
time
timely
the-
factor that eventually.
Yeah, the timeliness is there because of all those efforts. The third piece I didn't mention, and I don't think I heard staff mention it, is the city adopted last August a net zero policy. It doesn't apply to this project because it was already entitled, but it applies for every project that's not yet approved. And so when you talk about beyond the currently approved projects that has a demand on our water system, there's other projects in the pipeline. Those projects have an obligation to be net zero in our water
So this
needs.
project was not included in that?
No, but every other project going forward that was not approved by August of last year has that obligation. Even if you're adding a single-family home as a custom home, you pay that fee. Even if you're doing a tenant improvement to increase the demand from a tenant perspective, the fee gets collected. We are already starting to collect that fee. That fee was designed so that development pays for half of the costs of adding supply to the city's system, where the ratepayers pay the other half, and our rate system has already assumed it's going to go up to cover those costs. So I can tell you with some certainty that supply will be delivered for this project and other projects in the pipeline.
So the timely, it was the issue, is that kind? So the word timely was the concern that we had for?
Yeah, timely and available. And then, of course, yeah.
Well, I keep hearing different names, so I'll say it again. We have timely and we have available.
Okay.
And that's my assurance to the commission, and that's what I'm here to do, is make sure that you understand that we will deliver the water necessary. And look, if we can't, we have built-in systems. We are actually one of the, as you know, the California is out of the drought, but our community has decided to stay in stage 3 of our drought plan. We could have decided not to, but we're being conservative to stay in stage 3. We don't intend to leave stage 3 unless we have another really wet year like this year. So we're being, I think, overly conservative to make sure that we do what it takes to make sure that we manage our water supply.
Madam Chair.
Yeah.
Mr. Lambert, you mentioned that the EIR outlines that there's adequate supply, a long-term adequate supply, right?
Yes.
Is the EIR included in our staff report? Have we received the EIR where it specifically identifies that?
I don't know what their staff has given you. I believe so. We have a couple EIRs that we built our environmental analysis on this project.
Mm-hmm.
We did an addendum for this project to those environmental documents because that was the appropriate CEQA document necessary for this project.
So that EIR is a certified document.
Correct.
That is
Yes.
a city statement,
Yep.
going through the CEQA and everything, that could suffice the commission to say the city has certified the long-term adequate supply,
That's correct.
right? Okay. And then secondarily, you're saying that that there is timely available water,
Yes.
right?
Correct.
So is there a document that already exists that indicates that, or can you speak on the city's behalf today to say, I certify
Yes.
that there is timely availability of water?
And I would argue I don't have to do it today because I think our Ventura water letter does exactly that. It builds on the story. It builds from the original EIR and the addendum, and then everything else that's in place today to say we have adequate water. That's what the Shauna Epstein's letter from March 28th says. That's the way I read it, and I can reiterate that verbally to you today. And by augmenting the letter by giving you examples of how we're going to ensure we have timely, adequate water supply, I'll reiterate that we have a net zero policy, which is going to deliver more funding for additional water. We have funding available to pursue the connection to the state water project. We're in the design stage for that right now. And we are actually doing the CEQA and NEPA analysis, the national analysis on environmental impacts for our direct portable reuse plant. And we're actually sizing that property to either be a plant for direct portable reuse or desal or both. So the city has an aggressive program towards expanding our water supply. And we also have documents in place with our drought plan that say if things go bad, we have the ability to stop building permits. And if we have to go those next stages, if the drought comes back, we will.
So then, I think it's my last question for right now. The chart that was shown earlier that had the 2017 Comprehensive Water Resources Report, were those numbers factored then under the city's long-term plan for water supply to maintain it in net zero, to maintain a drought condition stage 3?
Yes.
So those numbers would actually increase if the city did not take those policy decisions. There would be more, it would show on that report that there would be more water. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And I also, since you brought up the chart too, there was a sort of a static line about additional allocation for projects that have been approved and allocated. That's assuming those projects are there today. We all know that these projects take 5 to 10 years, so that amount of allocation will take years to come in. That's why the timing list is relevant, because as those projects get built, we can serve them today, but by the time they're built and occupied, we'll have additional supply to serve them as well. I just want to
Excuse me, Mr. Lambert.
Sorry.
I
Yes.
just want to add a comment here, and I don't want to sidetrack you or anybody, but you did say the drought is over. It is not over.
Yes.
And I just want to say I'm studying this for my own city, and the drought emergency has been lifted by the governor, but the state is still in a drought. It hasn't been lifted for Central California counties, and we are still in a state of severe drought for all of coastal California. And Lake Casitas is at 30% of capacity. I just want to say that just in case anybody's in. But
Yeah.
your report is encouraging. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And I agree. I think what I meant to say was people think we're out of the drought, but Ventura is not accepting that. We as a city are not accepting that, as I think Oxnard isn't as well, because it's important.
If I could just throw in my 2 cents on
Yeah,
this one,
sure.
too, is that when you do an environmental analysis, you look at a conservative approach. What we did learn is there's this thing called drought that's pretty significant.
Yeah.
And it has the potential of coming back again. So to me, that's the new baseline. We have to consider that can occur again and not end up in a situation where we didn't plan for it.
It would appear the city is taking action.
We are. We are way ahead of the curve. Our Water Commission is watching this carefully, and they meet regularly, and they advise the City Council, and the City Council thought this was important enough to have a team of experts really help them advise them.
Yeah.
And I think the council clearly is taking every possible action to make sure we have adequate water supply.
And I think your residents are doing amazing, too.
They are.
Because they had to cut back significantly, correct, in
Yes.
order to be able to operate really with the amount of water that you have. So
Yes.
I don't know if that will be lifted once you start using recycled water for potable water, and once you get the imported water in, if that will be lifted. But I know they have done a significant sacrifice, really, to get to be able just to maintain what you have currently.
They have, and it's behavior, right? That's the risk of the drought. Saying the drought's over is people say they can turn their taps back on again, and so we hope that will be long-lasting behavior change. But we'll have to see how that plays out going forward. I agree with you. I wanted to just close with a couple of comments before I bring Brad up to talk about the watershed protection, and just reiterate what I think you heard from me before and from others is we are in a housing crisis too. We're in a water crisis, but we're also in a housing crisis, as you all know, and the city takes that seriously as well. We have right now close to 2,000 units about to be delivered on the street. That's a pretty big number. That includes a pretty good percentage of affordable units, probably in the 15% range. So we're doing our part to deliver that. City Council just on Monday did the second reading for our homeless shelter zoning, so we're making progress there as well, and hopefully in partnership with the county to deliver that shelter. So I want to make that point clear as well, and this is a critical project to deliver that, and I can tell you based on the sales of the adjacent project, there's a high demand for this housing in this part of Ventura because the rest of the city is pretty infill, and it will be multifamily. There's not a lot of places in the city of Ventura to deliver additional single family, and this is one of those few places. And I just want to reiterate what I said at the beginning. This property has been designated this way for decades. It's long been planned to be this way, and I am convinced as a 35-year city planner that there's no better use for this property than the one we've proposed, and that we've done the best job possible to address the issues of adjacency going forward. With that, I'd like to ask Brad Starr to come up from Public Works to talk about the flood control issues. But I think I want to just start by saying we've rejected the proposal from Watershed Protection District because it gives them authority to make a decision on jurisdiction. We're too premature for that. We are committed that we would do the right analysis on the site-specific engineering. If the jurisdictional line crosses into their jurisdiction, of course they will have permit authority. That's the way it always works, and we're committed to doing that again, and we've committed to that directly. But I'd like Brad to talk and maybe clarify some of the comments that were made by staff on that issue. Brad?
Commission, good morning. My name is Brad Starr, as Jeff said, with the City of Ventura, and I work for the Public Works Department. And I'm here to discuss the floodplain, or I could actually put some...
Not for the applicant.
I could actually talk a little bit about the water supply also. Not supply, but the projects that are upcoming with the City of Ventura. I can definitely talk about that also. It's in my division. I don't know where to start. I guess I should start with the current slides that I brought, just so I have them up there.
And for my benefit, that last sentence is the operative one. If the district determines it's their jurisdiction, the developer or city should get a permit, and why you object to that.
Well, I think some of the items within the report are important to, if the county thought that it was their jurisdiction by now, I think they would have already said, look, you're building within our jurisdiction. And clearly that's not the case, because it's more of a, will you allow us to do this? And they're requesting from the developer right now to really build or develop that channel south of the railroad tracks all the way down to the river. It won't only improve that area, it will improve everything above that area. So I have a couple, I would like to go through a couple of the issues in the LAFCo admin report. And I think there's some clarity between floodplain and FEMA, what their maps have and what this is pointing to, and the cost report of 2014 and the HDR report of 2005. So those two are getting a little bit mixed up, sorry. And I just want to separate those two. Those are two different issues, let's say. The FEMA, boy, I can't remember how to do this. This thing is, there it is. The FEMA map is to identify development property within the floodplain. And if it's in a higher risk floodplain, then we're going to have a base flood elevation associated with that off the river. In the city of Ventura, we require a 2 foot above base flood elevation for all structures that are built within that within the floodplain, if we allow it at all. In this model, in the FEMA maps, we're not building any structures within that floodplain that requires that base flood elevation. We're building structures in the lower risk area, which is actually lower than 12-inch of surface water model-wise. So we're actually building outside of that area, and that's exactly what the cost rate report and the HDR report of 2005 both identify also within this area. We're going to use the cost rate report for flows. The flows that comes out of that report is what we're going to utilize for the design of the flood waters through this site. As any site, just like we worked with Cosray and the county on the Brown Barranca at Parklands project, which is north of this area. That site, we actually did have to get a CLOMAR with FEMA. This project doesn't require a CLOMAR with FEMA. We're not doing anything within the floodplain in that higher risk area. So we're not putting water.
Can you say what CLOMAR is?
The CLOMAR, conditional
letter
of map revision.
Yeah.
And the CLOMAR is just a way, if we're going to modify the channel at all, a FEMA redline channel, we have to go through FEMA to identify what the floodplain is and what modifications are being done. This project does not put any water back into the floodplain, into the Brown Barranca. It actually takes water away from the Brown Barranca. And that property currently doesn't put water into the Brown Barranca. It actually runs away from the Brown Barranca. So and I guess that's the point. So the second part of this is, where does that water come from that we're talking about accepting as the developer will have to accept? That has not been designed yet. That happens after this approval process, and it happens during the design process. So the developer's not out of the woods, per se. I doubt that he knows how deep of the woods he's actually in, but he will shortly. But we manage that in the city. So I do have, and I didn't put it on my slides. However, I do have, just so you also realize, the 2014 report is strictly just a modeling report. It actually had 3 different objectives, and they didn't have to do with this development. They were for the emergency operations for the yard, the county yard, and it was also for future use for model. It was a modeling tool, and that's what we're going to use it for. It's exactly what it was proposed to be. It's a modeling tool. I spent time between the February meeting and this meeting talking with Hassan Cosray, who did the report, Cosray Consultants, and he's actually going to plan check this project. We're going to use his flows to design the project flows. So that's all kind of in the works now.
Excuse me.
Yes, ma'am.
Madam Chair. Mr. Starr, the FEMA map that you keep referring to, is that an agreed upon tool or process or whatever it is that you want to refer to, but is that FEMA map an agreed-upon document that everybody can rely?
That's the only document we have to rely on.
So every agency is going to align to the FEMA map we're talking about today?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. This is the one, and really, it's a separate issue. The flows is different from the FEMA map and the base flood elevation. So we just don't have that requirement to go through a CLOMAR process with FEMA on this project. And therefore, and we're not doing anything with the Brown Barranca, so that kind of kicks the Watershed Protection District.
So under this FEMA map, you're saying that the water is actually running away from the Brown Barranca and nothing is going into the Barranca?
The existing condition on site right now, yes.
Okay.
The water runs away. And I just wanted to show you quickly, if I do anything quickly. Okay, there's a couple things. This is the Brown Barranca. It's described as a rock line channel, soft bottom in the report. It's actually a little bit of everything. Each property owner has done their own improvements along this channel. Has anybody seen this? Great. This is the channel. So it's different. And the report does say it's owned and operated and maintained by the Watershed Protection District, which we agree. This thing is not very happy. Oh, come on. Here's some more pictures of some. These are just, all these side structures are things that I would assume were not permitted, and they were done by the property owners that own property along the channel. I mean, this structure on the right is actually the structure right there on the left in the channel. It just does not appear to be a watershed protection permitted structure. Neither does the slide, I guess that's supposed to be like some kind of a catch basin entry, but that's not a standard plan detail, I can tell you that. And then, this is what we're living with. It's really an, improvement as you want kind of thing through time, and this is what it is at this point. So I'm going to go back to the beginning, and I want to tell you, or show you actually, right now, the property ends here for this development, which is the railroad tracks. This is the railroad tracks. There's a structure as the railroad tracks crosses the Brown Barranca, and do I need to sit over to talk into this, or can you guys hear me from here? Because this is much more relaxing. So the water actually jumps the channel at 25 year, and it comes into this property above our existing property, or the proposed development property. And it jumps over the railroad tracks. I spent some time with Hassan, and we went over this. And I brought actually the 100-year and the 50-year and the 25-year from the report, and I could leave it with you. I'm going to give you the 25-year. I could give you all of them. But the 25-year really shows that the property itself, from here all the way down, is not inundated at the 25-year. However, this barrier where the railroad track crosses the Brown Barranca existing right now is actually causing water to come up around this structure here and actually fill this field. And then it pops over at the current crossing that they use for floodplain, the railroad company, and everybody. And that's where we're going to have to pick up a lot of the water. It's not so much, we're not saying we're going to build a channel. There is no, that's in the report. There's a channel, a parallel channel, and I think Kai explained it that way earlier. It's not a channel, it's the roadway. Our requirement is that 10-year flow will go through the storm drain system. And so we'll come up with the flows. A 10-year flow will have to come through the storm drain system. And then the developer will have to design a structure that will take the 100-year flow all the way out of the development without disturbing anything on the downstream side. We don't want to have any impacts to the current owners, the new development that's going on, There might have to be improvements downstream. They will have to take that flow through. So that'll dictate where the elevation of our structures are, the elevation of our roadways, the shape of our roadways, the gutters, our infrastructure that we put in the ground, all of that. And that's just something that we'll have to do during the design process. So, but we are going to use Hassan Khosrei and his 2014 study to give us those flows and where that water is actually coming into our development site at. Because you have to take the cross-law drainage. And at this point, the water is not coming from most of this water doesn't it doesn't spill over directly from the channel totally. It really comes from up here, through this property, and then into this property. So there is a little distortion, I should say. When we talk about FEMA, and then we're not talking about flows, and we're not talking about where the water has to be collected at. And that's what we're talking to Hassan Khosrei about, because the developer will have to design his development according to that modeling effort.
So Brad, Madam
Yes,
Chair, so at 100-year it will overflow before that gets to the railroad?
Sorry.
If you have you're talking about 125-year.
Yeah.
At 100-year, would it spill? Would it open?
Oh, I would assume at 25-year, it kind of initiates up here, and from there on, it's going to definitely inundate that channel. But it inundates now. This is a current modeling for that channel. The 05 report was actually an exercise, a pre-design report for that channel, and it pretty much says the same thing in this area.
Where's the water come from?
Oh, it goes all the way up. It goes all the way up to the farm fields above wells and.
Oh, okay. And then it comes down the.
Yeah, it goes right through. You know where the new Parklands project is at Wells and Blackburn, between
Yes,
Blackburn and Telegraph?
Yes. Okay.
Well, it goes right through that property, right next to those. The apartments are being built now, across from the ARCO station. And then it goes straight up from there, and then but water comes from that whole area. And there's another development over at between Blackburn and Telegraph at Satakoy Avenue.
Okay.
Williams Homes is building the farm, they call it, and that water comes down there too. Comes along Blackburn, ties in, and then that channel becomes Brown Brink. Brown Brink is receives water from both those areas, and then as you come downstream, it keeps collecting. But this structure here, the existing structure, really puts a lot of the water outside of the Brown Bracket. It spills over up here. And that's something the county knows about. I mean, it's in the study. Okay. We all know. It just didn't get, I don't think, brought up in that manner at this meeting.
In our report, it says that in a 100-year flood, and you correct me if I'm wrong, in a 100-year flood situation, 2/3 of the water will flow from the brink onto this parcel in question. Do you agree with that?
Not necessarily. I think that 2/3 of the water might come out of the Barranca, but not necessarily to this property.
It does say specifically overflow onto this parcel that we're talking about.
From talking to Hassan, it's going to go to both sides.
So
it's not going to stick to one side.
I guess the key is, are you designing this so when 2/3 of the water does overflow in a 100-year flood event, it won't flood the project?
That's saying it in a different way.
Okay.
I would say that we're going to make them to design it for the flood analysis that Hassan Khosrei and the county has approved as what we should model the development for the flows. And so we'll make them model this development to accommodate those flows and collect it at the right points.
Using the county model.
What?
Using the county model.
Using the county's approved, what they want us to use, which is the 2014 model.
And the concern that the Watershed Protection District has at a parallel channel, which the landscape buffer would be used for, could undermine the existing channel that is there. Do you find that has a potentially, does that have credence in your mind?
Well, there is no parallel channel.
I thought that the landscape buffer was to work as a dual use, so if it does overflow, that it can be used. But that isn't the intent of the project.
No, that got kind of...
That is a distortion then. That's what we had understood, that is one of the purposes of the landscape.
Well, what we did is that area is actually this area. The 2005 study by HDR actually had, it was a pre-design analysis. So it actually had, and we were stakeholders, the City of Ventura stakeholders with that study. And so with that study became an analysis of how wide that channel would have to be once it was built out. So the city has left the largest area, this right-of-way, we've left the largest area that was in that study, the kind of chosen model that the county wanted to go with, the alternative that was chosen, the recommended one, for the county to then build out in the future. And we've in 05, it was clear the city has a couple $1 million to give to the county to help them move this along. And this has been available for them this whole time. So we have money to give the county for the improvements. They come in with developments, and so we have that money. And we went over this at the meeting we just had, Kai, and what did we meet, March? We met in February, end of February?
It does just seem like there is a difference in facts.
Well, and I guess that's what I'm trying to...
One fact that we're
yes.
getting is that the landscape buffer, the park, whatever you want to call it, that parallels the channel could be used for water conveyance. And if it is used for water conveyance, it could undermine the existing channel. And your pictures really say it all. That looks really capable of being undermined, right? It's not a hardened channel. It's kind of, as it were, it's pretty natural.
Well, we're going to have a buffer. We'll have the buffer for the right-of-way to allow the county to build the channel out in the future, or whenever they feel like it.
Yes.
And then the roadway is between the homes and the channel.
Okay.
I think the channel they're talking about is really the infrastructure underground and the actual roadway.
Okay, so I just wanted to get it clear regarding, I wanted your opinion of the potential for undermining the channel as has been related to us from, I believe, the Watershed Protection District because of the way the grading is going to be, that it will allow for the conveyance of water in addition to the conveyance through the channel. So you're saying that isn't part of the project, and that's just something I want to get clear on.
The developer will have to design that area to accommodate any kind of backwash erosion that would have happened. And it's something we will collaborate with the Watershed Protection District on. I'd be glad to.
But
it'll be done on city property.
My point is that area is not to be used for conveyance of water. That is not part of any design.
Surface flow, not a channel.
Correct, surface water.
Yeah, just like
It's
every
not.
development.
So you agree it's not for conveyance at all?
It has never been
Okay.
identified for a conveyance like a separate barranca or
Okay.
with I think the wording in the requirement for the watershed is it has banks and a bottom to it. It's not that kind of structure. It's a roadway.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then you don't have you don't buy the concern that it could undermine the channel because it's not doing what the Watershed Protection District said it would do.
It's not a channel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Madam Chair. So, Mr. Starr, those pictures you showed they spoke volumes to me. As part of the development, if we're concerned about the undermining of the Brown Barranca, then it seems like it needs to be improved from the current state that it is. So have you had conversations with the Watershed Protection Agency to improve the Barranca in order to support the operation of it with this development?
Well, clearly since 05 we have, or before that, because we were stakeholders in the 05 HDR pre-design report. So that was I assume, start the initiation of a more hardened channel for that area. It just hasn't happened yet.
And I don't want you necessarily to speak on behalf of the watershed, but have they outlined a timeline on when they're going to make the improvements for that?
No, ma'am, I do not have a timeline.
Okay.
Relative to the project just to the north of it, it looks like a farmhouse, or I'm not sure what it is. But you say the water at the 25-year flood plain will flood there. And does it also slope, like this current project we're looking at, it also slope downward?
Yeah, I'm not so sure about the grade, but right now it all flows this way in the model. So
Okay.
I'm pretty sure, yeah, that's the way it slopes now.
So the developer of this project
Yeah.
is only responsible for the water that actually is on their property, not what's above them?
And all flow that crosses
Okay.
onto their property.
Okay.
And there's the key.
All right.
Anything that naturally flows across their property now,
Okay.
they'll have to accept and run through their property and then make sure there's nothing bad that happens downstream of them. We don't want that. We don't want flooding.
Right.
Look.
So technically, it could be draining away from the Barranca and not anywhere near the Barranca.
Oh, no, this whole property drains away from the Barranca
Right.
now, and it will in the future. It's going to be designed to drain towards the west and the south, this
Right.
way.
So really then, the Barranca should not be affected at all by this project, right?
Well, that's what we've been saying. We're
Well,
not affecting the
think
Barranca at all.
When we look at how the water flows, I think everybody needs to be really clear that it's
Yep.
not going to be flowing alongside of the Barranca.
No.
That's not what we anticipate.
No.
Okay.
Is there an existing storm drain system in that project towards where it drains or will drain?
Yes, the downstream side definitely has existing and newly installed storm drain systems. We will be tying in.
Tie
There
into
will-
that.
Yep, and there will be an analysis if they're sized correctly for this amount of flow. And if they're not, the developer will have to improve those.
Okay. Are there any other questions? I'll go on. Yes,
I just want to.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I want to help Brad leave the podium. No, I just wanted to conclude with the city's presentation to remind the commission that we're really looking for you to approve the resolution that has no additional conditions because we believe we've addressed all the condition issues raised by your staff. Thank you very much.
thank you.
Could I ask one last question back to the water supply? I don't think that was fully addressed, but do you have proof that you have adequate water supply?
I think I've already provided that proof, yes.
And that was?
That's the letter from our water manager from March 28th, which says, based on the original EIR, the addendum that we prepared for this project, and all other circumstances before us today, we have adequate supply to serve this project. And if circumstances change so that we don't, we have conditions in place to assure that we
And
don't allow
that's
the
where
project to
I was
proceed.
kind of looking at the word proof. You can say you have an adequate supply, but your studies all show that you are currently in a deficit.
I provided the best answer I can today.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you.
We have a lot of
Could
cards.
Could we hear from the watershed protection?
Sergio?
Good morning. For the record, my name is Sergio Vargas with the Watershed Protection District, Deputy Director for Watershed Planning and Permits. And I'm here to answer any questions and clarify any of the statements.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Just get closer.
Oh, okay.
So, okay, I'll start then. So at the last hearing, there were comments made, and I think it was you, but I'm not sure 100%. The quote was, "If all is resolved, we're okay." And that was the quote from Watershed Protection. So I'm wondering, between February and now this hearing, has everything been resolved? Is Watershed fine? Is there any outstanding issues that Watershed is having a concern with this project?
We, in our discussions with the city, looking for the resolution to reach that we're okay, everything is resolved, we were working on a language to work together to identify a solution for potential flooding and impacts as a result of the development. So from that perspective is if they were to agree with the condition that we offered, then that would obviously give the district the ability to assure that the Brown Barranca is not going to be impacted, that there will not be impacts to adjacent properties, as a result of the improvements, and all based on Brown Barranca jurisdiction.
So a condition that said something to the effect that during the final engineering, if an impact was identified, the applicant and the city would come to Watershed Protection District for a permit.
Yes, and this is more like the car before the horse. Typically, you have the horse first, you know what the project is, you know what the impacts are, then you design the project. This case is not the case.
Well,
We're
I mean,
trying
until
to
you
fit
do
it
the
into
final
a-
engineering,
Yes.
it's difficult to know whether there is or isn't an impact.
Without knowing information, yes, that's correct.
My question to you is, everything that was presented this morning on behalf of the applicant and the city, do you agree with everything that they presented? Or do you have any challenges to it?
Not necessarily. I think it's a matter of interpretation. As we explained before, the study was done, the two studies that we did in Brown Barranca, one was originally to find solutions, that is correct. We did not have a specific discussions as to the implementation. Reason for that is that in Zone 2, which is Santa Clara River watershed, we have higher priorities that the district is focusing on. So this project has not come up to the level of attention that it requires. So when the development came into play, then that was a perfect opportunity to have the discussion with the city. No, we haven't had any discussions of improvement of Brown Barranca with the North Bank development. That has not been the case. The city is not, has not supported that idea. We did not know that there were $2 million worth of monies. The last we heard from the city, they had $400,000. That
It's
is
on the
the
record.
type of information that I knew personally.
It's
from
on the
discussions
record
with the
now.
city.
So, but just to clarify, so of the presentation this morning that the city made, are there any challenges that you have to any of those statements that they made this morning?
Some point of clarification is that without knowing the information as to how much water they're going to be able to handle, whether I didn't agree with the channelization concept, particularly because the exhibit that the project is proposing clearly demonstrated that there is going to be a channelized or channel-like facility that includes the city, streets, and adjacent lands, which is the green buffer area. So that to me is clearly a channel when it's going to convey significant amount of flows.
You're saying that road, that's the buffer, the road is a channel?
The road becomes a channel, de facto.
I suppose we're getting into technical language of defining surface water and channel and
Well, but
everything else.
I think what would have to happen in the final engineering is to show, per the city, that the water was all draining off-site and not into the Barranca. And if that is the case, then that does not become a channel. Am I right?
Yes, the water is going to have to end at someplace, and we
Right,
don't
I
know
mean,
where that
but
someplace is yet.
From what staff reported, is that it would be draining to the adjacent property to an existing water, sanitation line, and so there would be no direct drainage into Barranca. And I would think once the final engineering was done, that would either prove or disprove that fact, and then based on that, a determination would be made whether permit was necessary, sequentially speaking.
Very likely, I would say that a permit will be necessary whether they collect the flow inside the development. May not necessarily go back to Brown Barranca, but it will go to Santa Clara River, which is also a jurisdictional channel.
So
that water needs to go somewhere and needs to discharge in a way that is not going to impact somebody else.
And that's the documentation that you need.
Correct.
Yeah, Madam Chair, in Tully's letter, Tully sent a letter, to Kai, and he says that the city remains committed to working with the watershed district to protect the project and adjacent facilities from damage from water storms and so forth. So you're still going to be working with Tully on this in order to correct or to find out exactly what they need to do?
Absolutely.
And I think
yeah.
the city commits themselves, saying right there that they are willing to work with you to correct whatever needs to be corrected. Is that?
Yes, and we do appreciate the city's willingness to work with us to utilize the latest available information. I did want to clarify that one thing in terms of FEMA maps, National Flood Insurance Program has regulations. The regulations state that the flood insurance rate maps are to be used for development. That is correct. There are other requirements that are also called for in the program, such as the requirement of using best available information when it comes to development, future development. 44 CFR 60.3 calls the fact that if FEMA does not have the information, or there is more recent information, that new information needs to be utilized for development.
To update.
Correct. And when new information is utilized, then there needs to be, when development occurs, there should be a conditional letter of mark revision, and there should be a letter of mark revision after the improvements are completed. So those, as a clarification, that is what the National Flood Insurance Program requires.
So potentially they could be required or not required that they might need flood insurance.
In the normal course, according to the FEMA guidelines, there will need to be a letter of mark revision at the end.
That potentially they could,
yes,
they might be required to get that, or should get flood insurance.
Yes.
But I'm just going back to what Tali says here, that he's committed to working with you, with Watershed, to make sure that the project adjacent facilities are not damaged from stormwater or flooding. And I think that's important right here. Anyway, just for whatever it's worth.
Yes, and I would like to point out that the district does appreciate working together with the city to find a resolution, just to make sure that the floodwaters of Brown Barranca are addressed adequately and there's no impact to adjacent properties.
Thank
So,
you.
Madam Chair, based upon Commissioner Zaragoza's comments, then, is the flood insurance potential something that would be included in the real estate disclosures?
Yes.
And that would be a
I'm assuming
mitigating,
yes.
a mitigating measure? Okay.
A couple of questions too. And the city is indicating that they will not be using the road or the landscape buffer that runs along the side for water conveyance. do you agree that isn't going to happen?
Unless I see a design concept that tells me how the water is going to be handled on the site, I don't know. Everything is a guesswork at this point.
I see. So when the concern was expressed about it eroding the channel, it was on the assumption that the water would be flowing alongside it. But that is just an assumption. You haven't seen any plans that indicate that.
No.
And from what I'm hearing, they're not thinking of doing that, right? And that's what they've stated.
I suspect that they will be used in the streets to convey flows.
Certainly.
Now, the street capacity is very limited
Right.
when it's very flat. It doesn't have a lot of capacity, so storm drain system would be necessary.
Right, and I understand that. We do that with other developments in the county, but this was specific to the concern of it eroding or undermining the existing channel because of a parallel conveyance. So I understand then the city saying, no, we're not doing that, and so I think that's off the table then as a concern that has been raised from my reading. Also, it was stated that in a 100-year flood, you can expect 2/3 of the water coming out of the barranca onto this property. You stand by that?
Yeah, as indicated, the railroad bridge structure creates an impediment that is significant, and it causes the water to overtop and then sheet flow along the properties, just like Brad Starr indicated in his presentation. And it's a matter of where the water is going to go. And a lot of this water will go through that proposed development.
Right, and that is already an existing condition. That's not, so it's just something they need to be aware of when they're developing the property. Mm-hmm. And then the final question, and I think this gets back to the disagreement, and that is the district wants to be able to determine whether it is their jurisdiction once they see the plan. And if it is their jurisdiction, that means they need a permit. The city does not want the district to determine whether it's their jurisdiction. They want to determine it. Am I correct in that is the issue between the two of you in this condition?
Yes, we believe that the Watershed Protection District, it would be the right entity to determine its jurisdiction. The board may have that decision.
No.
If there's on the ordinance WP2, obviously if there's a disagreement from the perspective of the enforcement of the ordinance, then there's an appeal process that will come to the board of the Watershed Protection District for appeal in any decision that the district might take.
And this is in the city. It's not in the. At once annexed, this would be in the city. Right? Currently, it's in the unincorporated county. So the question of jurisdiction, to me, it just seems like it is a legal one. Someone should have that answer. Who determines the jurisdiction? Do you know the legal? I know we haven't been able to nail that down here at LAFCo, but is there a legal basis for determining who selects whether it's your jurisdiction or not?
Well, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's based on the final engineering and the studies that come out from that final engineering. And when that happens...
But who determines
if it's determined that it does impact it, then the city is required to go to the Watershed Protection District.
I think that is the crux of the disagreement. If it is the district that determines it's their jurisdiction, or if it's the city that determines it's the Watershed Protection's jurisdiction.
I think based on the letter from Tully, they're going to be working together on it.
Yeah, I'm just saying this is a condition that has been recommended by the WPD to say the district determines whether it's their jurisdiction after they've seen the plans. And the city's saying no. Yeah. So that's something we have to decide, and I'm thinking as I'm deciding that, what's the law say on this? Because it seems like there is a law somewhere that determines which agency determines the jurisdiction.
Can I just ask Mr. Walker if he can weigh in?
I tried once.
If I can offer some clarification, based on the advice that we have from council,
which council?
The county council for the district. We asked that question, and advice that we were provided was that the district would have the initial responsibility to identify whether a channel was within the jurisdiction of the district. And in the case, considering that there would be a parallel channel right next to Brown Barranca that basically takes water from Brown Barranca, puts it on a parallel channel, and then not knowing exactly where it's going to go back to, either it goes back to Brown Barranca or will go to Santa Clara River somehow, then based on that, the assessment was that very likely this parallel channel will become a jurisdiction, part of the jurisdiction of Brown Barranca, because the definition for a channel jurisdiction is bed and banks. So if you have even parallel channel, you still have bed and banks from one channel to the other.
If it isn't a channel, then it's not jurisdictional.
If it is not a channel and its sheet flows, is only the district can adopt that circumstance to be a jurisdiction, but not necessarily in the case as it stands today.
Okay.
If I may respond, Commissioner Ramirez's inquiry and follow up again with the question you asked earlier, Commissioner Parks. The initial decision as to whether something's within the Watershed Protection District's jurisdiction lies with the Watershed Protection District. And then as Mr. Vargas was indicating, it sounds like there is an appeal process if a property owner disagrees with that initial determination to appeal it to the board of the Watershed Protection District for a determination. And then the typical legal proceeding is if somebody disagrees with the ultimate decision of the Watershed Protection District Board, that can be challenged in court. So that would be the process, but certainly the initial decision as to whether something falls within the Watershed Protection District's jurisdiction lies with the district.
And that then gets back to the condition that you recommend, and for whatever reasons the city doesn't support. So that's good to know that is based on legal finding. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can add a little bit more clarification on that. The Watershed Protection District has jurisdiction on county unincorporated and incorporated cities. Is countywide. Those jurisdictional channels do not recognize boundaries, and for that reason, when the district adopted the policies, is countywide, and so it makes no difference whether right now it's in an incorporated and tomorrow it's in the city of Ventura.
The J Street channel in Oxnard is a good example of that. It's right in the city of Oxnard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Any other question?
Just some, it's probably not a question for him, but isn't this supposed to be a buffer zone and a really kind of a park to actually separate the industrial from the residential?
Yes.
And it was never really intended to be a place to move water through. Am I correct? Would you agree with that? I mean, according to what you've read.
That is correct.
Okay.
Thank
and
you.
that's where it lies. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have multiple cards here, and I would request that everyone keep with their 5-minute.
Madam Chair, can I'm just looking at the time. I have another meeting. Can we ask maybe that maybe a couple of minutes per, 5 minutes times.
Absolutely.
Times what do you have, 30 or 40?
Well, I'm down to about 20.
20?
I'm sure that, I'm just, asking the board
Sure.
in a couple
We'll
of
take
minutes.
a 5-minute break.
Well, no,
is that in?
for speakers to maybe speak for a couple of minutes.
Couple
as opposed-
minutes, okay.
As opposed to 5, I'm sure, that most of the people are going to concur that they want the project or don't want the project, but I think maybe a couple of minutes per speaker.
That would be very good if all the speakers could be very brief and concise.
Yeah. That's just a recommendation, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Another part of the applicant is Vince Daly. But if you could keep within the time frame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you put the slide up that says preliminary landscape plan, please, from the booth? It's the preliminary landscape plan. Here it is. No. So my name is Vince Daly. I've been involved in the project since 2004. The Venoni family approached me when their property was being surrounded by residential units and development, and they are farmers, and they knew that they had to do something. They could not farm the land anymore, so we went through the process beginning in 2004. The land use issue has been there since the beginning. It was property that was not subject to SOAR. It was property that had a sphere annexation for residential, multiple general plans, multiple community plans, calling for residential. In fact, in 2009, there was a long process for the Wells Saticoy Community Plan where Harrison and all the industrial people sat across the table from me with the Cal Poly kids that were doing the first analysis. So been a lot of involvement. The only thing we did get through the entire 14-year process was one letter from Harrison that was a non-objection letter, and that basically asked the project to be conditioned for a disclosure, which it is conditioned for that. But more than that, we, as Mr. Lambert said, it was all about compatibility. There's residential units there to the west. All you'd be doing by changing this property to industrial would be moving the line. You'd be moving the line and you'd be going right against the backs of those units. You'd have by right zoning to do that, and that's probably what an industrial user would do. So what we did is we just really dove in, and even though the underlying plan is actually not the correct plan, we actually have more of a buffer from the corner. We now have a 5-acre linear park. The city basically said, this is going to be the corner of our city. This is not good for industrial. It's never been planned for industrial. LAFCo even annexed the sphere in residential. So I want people to understand that that is a well-thought-out urban forest along the edge. It's a 5-acre park. It has activities. You can start from one corner of the boot. It looks like a sort of a cowboy boot, I guess, or a high-fashion lady shoe. Take your pick. Heel's kind of small. But you can basically start from that corner and go all the way up. Those homes right now are built right along the edge. This project's been planned together since 2004. I'm going to address a few things. Sanitation district, I'm glad they showed up, and I'm glad we worked that out. I'm glad staff brought that up, and I think that was positive. That was something we could dive into a little deeper. And I think with the wall and some of the additions, I think it's better. The flood control, we don't add a drop to the Barranca. The Barranca is an issue with the county department. It's probably an issue that the county should be moving along in their analysis a long time ago. But we have used all their current data. But more than that, the flood control where we're going to drain into is on the corner of the property, the existing property. We already have an agreement with Watt Development to pay them a few $100,000 for the upsizing. The line's in. The line for our storm drain is in the ground. And we're already on the hook to pay for it. There are streets stubbed in. We have Edison easements through the property. As far as industrial use, that would be that left the gate a long time ago. This is a residential project. Speak into the mic more? Okay. Oh, further away. Oh, sorry. Too much. As far as flooding, that's a situation that flood control needs to pull together and get plans. Even if I wanted to fix that, I couldn't. There's no plans. It's just preliminary. So we work really hard to design with even his preliminary stuff. I think staff has done a great job. And if it shows up that we do put a drop into the river or into the channel, we've got to do a water course permit. But we've already designed it. It's already been built.
Mr. Daly, would you
Yes.
mind maybe using a pointer and showing us where the drain, how you connect to the neighboring area where it drains?
This one? I'm not getting it.
Okay.
Too high tech.
Is it at the tip of the boot?
Yeah. So this is currently where the storm drain system and line is right here. It's oversized. It's already built. We have to pay for it. There's streets already connecting in. Everything's designed to take the water this way. That's the way it goes now. That's the way it's going to go in the future. With, I think we talked about sewer. I think one of the reasons why we're reluctant to do the condition, Commissioner Parks, is because they're trying to put us on the hook for the whole thing. And it's like it would be a sewer line that we don't drain into. Let me just finish. It's
You
like
mean watershed protection district, not sewer. Sewer's a different thing.
pardon me.
We're talking
Watershed
about
protection.
stormwater, right?
Thank you for
Two
the
different
interruption.
things.
Yes.
Oh, you're welcome.
We don't put a drop into it. It'd almost be like if there was a parallel sewer line that we're not impacting, and they say, well, maybe there's some issues with it. The city has money to give them once they figure out what they're going to do. We don't drain into it. It's not fair to make us do it. I develop in the county. I am a fair guy. If I have impacts, I mitigate. I don't have an impact here.
Mr.
If I
Daly?
do, there's a water course permit process. The problem is I feel like water course is sort of drumming things up, so they put me on the hook to pay for it. I don't think that's fair. So I think we need to be fair in that respect. So back to land use. This has been thought out. This buffer in this system is way better than you would ever get if you zone the property industrial or you left it alone and you try to make it industrial. This was years of thought. It's about $1 million buffer, added about another $250,000 with the walls and things from sanitary district, which we were happy to do. It was the right thing to do. This has been very well thought out. So in conclusion, I would ask and respectfully request that you move on the project, allow us to move forward with the project. I think it's alternative number 3, with the city conditions. The city has covered all these things. They've covered every issue. And at the end of the day with water, you need to trust the experts. You guys all have cities, you all have experts, this city water department has vetted this thing over and over again. At the end of the day, it's who you're going to trust. And the city water department, as you guys have city water departments, I think it's somebody to trust. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Sandy Smith?
Members of the commission, Sandy Smith, third-generation citizen of Ventura. I'm speaking actually as a private citizen, but I'm also, with my role at CESP Consulting, worked on behalf of the Parklands Project and also on the neighboring Watts Community Project, which has been alluded to here. I might want to just add, I know most of you are familiar with the City Council in Ventura. They take land use issues pretty seriously there, and this came to you on a 7-0 vote to have this project annexed. I can also say that the water issues, and we've heard about the Net Zero Water Project that's funding the water systems within our city. I went to all those Water Commission hearings representing WAD and other developments in our city. One that's currently in the planning process. It will pay a $3 million fee for water rights for the city. So it's the development that takes place in the city of Ventura that's actually paying for our water infrastructure. I might want to add that in response to Kai's comment that Parklands did not have water rights that they gave to the city of Ventura, but there are substantial improvements if it's an issue that we've been working on the Brown Barranca, which also goes through the Parklands project, and we've been working with Watershed for 5 years on the Brown Barranca project and the impacts to that. And I just want to say that I have complete confidence in our city of Ventura working with watershed protection and make sure that there are any impacts, they'll be addressed in the context of this project. So I might just want to reiterate then that the water issues have been addressed. I'll point again to what Mr. Lambert pointed out in the letter from Shauna Epstein, that those issues have been addressed. And as somebody who's followed the net zero and our water policies that have been coincide with the adoption of our land use policies, the city council had the opportunity to vote not to let any projects to move ahead as the net zero policy was coming to fruition, and they did not. They voted for projects to continue. And this has been, as noted, in the system for some time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we doing 5 minutes a speaker?
That's how we do it, 2 minutes.
2 minutes. I was going to ask her to adjust. Can you adjust the timer, too?
Yeah.
Thank you. Stephanie Caldwell? You'll have 2 minutes.
Good morning. My name is Stephanie Caldwell. I serve as the president and CEO of the Ventura Chamber of Commerce. We represent 700 business members that have more than 25,000 employees, and it is on their behalf that I speak for you today. The Chamber of Commerce has identified the lack of housing at all levels as the single most significant impediment to economic growth. Both the lack of available housing as well as affordability issues are making Ventura less competitive than our neighboring cities and counties. Even with the projects that are currently in the process, we are still lagging behind Santa Barbara County in growth and simply making up for deficits that we have had for the past decade. You may recall the article in the Pacific Coast Business Times a few months back, quoting economist Mark Schneep as saying, if current restrictions on new development remain in place, the county will not be able to produce the amount of housing needed to support the population and sustain the workforce. It has certainly squeezed out the 25 to 64-year-old demographic and led to residential crowding, high home prices and rental prices, and tight rental vacancies. We have the opportunity to bring in new housing at a variety of levels: apartments, townhomes, and single-family homes. It could help us progress by adding much-needed housing stock here in Ventura. This project has been in the process, as you've heard, for a very, very long time, more than 12 years. The Venoni family who owns the property has been more than patient and deserves to see it through to completion. Our community deserves the addition of this neighborhood. This body has been involved now for some time and has had a number of questions, and I believe have had those questions responded to appropriately. The city has answered all of the technical concerns, including the flood control issues, sanitation issues, water supply, noise issues, and land use issues. What we're left with now is an opportunity to do what is fair, to do what is right, and allow the family to complete this project. So I stand before you today and urge you to do the right thing, trust the city of Ventura to implement the entitlements.
Thank you, Ms. Caldwell.
And annex the property. Thank you.
Lori Vanoi. You'll have 2 minutes.
Just to clarify, I believe 4 people ceded me their time.
That's true.
Thank you. Members of the LAFCo Commission, we know you have a difficult job and weighty concerns, watching over the county, protecting the best interests of the many while preserving the welfare and rights of the individual. You also have the obligation to be fair. Others have addressed the history, regulations, and status of this project. I want to tell you about the impact of this protracted process on our family. I once overheard a conversation between Charles and his father, Leo. Pop asked what progress had been made with the project. He was upset because the other tracts on neighboring land had been approved, and he realized houses would soon closely border our farm. Leo was adamant. A working farm could not survive surrounded by houses. He wanted to know what was the holdup. Charles answered that the family's application to develop the parcel had been accepted, but things now seemed to be stalled. He had no idea why. Unfortunately, through the years, they were destined to have this conversation again and again and again, through countless delays and postponements, while seeing other projects begun after ours come to completion. Charles promised his father that he would see this project through to the end, told him to rest easy, that he would take care of it, just as he would take care of the farm in Somas and the rest of the family for Pop. Charles has repeatedly been asked to show good faith by acceding to requests for easements, in effect taking part of our land. Buffer zones between fields and new houses became our responsibility, and again were taken from our property, resulting in less usable acreage but increased operating expenses due to the proximity of housing, shrinking not only our family farm but also the business's bottom line. Case in point, the acre of strawberries 2 weeks from the first harvest had to be removed to accommodate utilities by adjacent development, all without recompense, to show our good faith. Still, the decision to stop farming on this property was difficult. When Charles looks at this land, he does not, as some have said, see dollar signs. He smiles, thinking of his aunts taking him by the hand when he was little and walking through the walnut trees one year it snowed. He remembers his dad and his uncles planting lemon trees precisely in line. He sees the faces of tenants who leased the land and became family friends as they built one of the most successful certified nurseries in this state. And we both see in our mind's eye his grandmother pulling a red wagon with our son inside. Our love for this land and our desire to farm has remained constant. However, the change in zoning being taken under the city's sphere of influence and the resulting surrounding development have all had their impact and changed the viability of farming in this place we have loved. Like his father, Charles is a man of his word, and once given, he'll do everything in his power to keep his promise. He knew nothing of this process, so he found an advisor and partner. Still, he has spent hundreds of late nights through the small hours of many mornings working to understand this process and prepare what was needed to ensure the success of the project for his family. He has willingly gone to countless meetings with every department and agency involved whenever asked. He has met and learned from many people. However, he has also experienced the frustration of meetings where the agency representative never showed up, and others who stated they hadn't the time or the budget to review the project, which had been sitting on their desk for months. Yet, their reports have been submitted to this commission. I recall the consternation when one agency asked if he would wait until a federal study was published so that its information could be used. Charles asked when that might be, and the reply was, "Oh, we anticipate the study will be released within the next 10 years, but it will also take us a few years after that to study the information." He has been unfailingly patient with postponements and staff reports that have been published at the last minute and during weekend holidays, giving us less time to review, understand, and be prepared. He has been stoic in the face of report content that emphasizes issues, but downplays accommodations and solutions that have been reached, as well as the prevalence of these alternative facts. He has done his best to understand and comply with every request and regulation, yet he's been told that it isn't enough. This has bewildered and discouraged him. He's actively sought the advice of people from the community more familiar with the workings of this commission so he can better understand. However, after he's shared his experiences and the quandary of our situation, the first response has always been, "Who did you tick off?" I've never heard of this happening before. And those from whom he has sought guidance are as dumbfounded as he.
Ms. Vanoni, can you wrap it up, please?
I had 8 minutes, ma'am. Okay. I have seen the toll of his efforts, the frustration and the stress, and have had to watch him age far beyond his years before my eyes. This commission's actions and inaction have forced our family into a void, a limbo, from which we cannot escape until this matter is resolved, putting lives on hold, negating opportunity, and shattering dreams. We cannot continue as we are, yet we cannot go forward until the city's annexation of this land is approved. One of the things that Pop looked forward to when his project was finally complete was Charles buying a farm of his own, something he had always wished to do. However, this process is so long and expensive that many opportunities have passed by, including one that Charles had dreamed of all his life. We have done everything that has been asked of us through this process for more than a decade. We have been given every indication that we were following the correct path, consistent with the city's plans, and that we should move forward with the conversion of this land's use. Unanimous approvals by the city have been granted. It's now a clear example of the infill approved by the SOAR initiative, proposed and endorsed by at least 4 members and alternates of this commission, as well as the people of Ventura County. Now, 7 months later, and after 12 years of delays, last-minute postponements, and enormous expense, with our farm surrounded by development and quickly becoming unsustainable, we hear the executive offer has recommended that the project should be denied. How is that fair? Let me assure you, this family will not go away. We're a part of the community. It's our home and has been for over 100 years. We will continue farming in Ventura County, but like any business, we must be fiscal realists. Our viability as a family farm is contingent on the finalization of this project so that we can find another on which to grow our crops and our family. For this to happen, you, the members of the LAFCo Commission of Ventura County, must vote to approve annexation of this small piece of property without condition so that Uncle Leo's farm and family can continue to farm. I hope you will be fair.
Thank you. For the record, there were 4 persons who gave up their time to speak for her behalf. Mary Teresa Poe. She supports the annexation. Jonathan Pinkerton.
Good morning, Commissioners.
2 minutes.
I'll be less than 2 minutes.
Okay.
My name's Jonathan Pinkerton. I'm a family farmer that farms avocados and lemons on the east end of Ventura. I live in Camarillo. I'm just speaking for myself and also as a fellow farmer that's sympathetic to the challenges that sometimes exist within farming in the ag-urban interface. I respectfully urge the commissioners to support the annexation of this property, not just for the Vanoni family, but for the greater good of the entire community. Thanks.
Thank you. Edgar Terry?
Good morning. My name is Ed Terry, and I'm a local grower here in Ventura County and a lifelong resident of the city of Ventura. I speak in support of the Venoni family, and like the Venoni family, the Terry family has been farming here in the county in excess of 100 years. We have lots of properties that border the ag-urban interface, and I can tell you the issues that Lori spoke about are exponential. It's it's impossible to have properties surrounded on 2 sides, 3 sides, and try to farm it. And as you have read in the paper and heard on the news recently, the state recently passed new spray buffer zones between ag and schools and daycare centers, and it's making life almost impossible for a lot of growers that butt up against cities, residential facilities, industrial facilities. Projects like this need to happen. They need to happen, as Josh said, for the greater good. These are infill projects. They're not viable farms anymore. I think we need to come and realize that. There's nothing wrong with allowing these type of properties to be developed, and there's nothing wrong with allowing families like the Vanonis to buy other farms in the county and farm them to their fullest extent. I support the Venoni family. This project needs to happen. It's been going on for too long. Let's go ahead and approve this and get it done. Thank you.
Thank you. John Christ?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. My name is John Christ. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Farm Bureau of Ventura County. And I'm here today to urge you to approve the annexation that's before you and reject your staff's recommendation. I found it somewhat ironic that the staff report on this item spent so much time highlighting the conflicts, the potential for complaints about noise and other disturbances from the adjacent industrial operations, because these are exactly the same kind of complaints we hear people make about adjacent farming operations. The quality of life here is immensely enhanced by the patchwork nature of our landscape. We've got farms that are lovely to look at in close proximity to our houses. But the flip side of that is what you've just heard. The same people who embrace the view of their adjacent farms and ranches complain about the smells, noise, and dust that are the inevitable byproducts of agricultural production. They also don't think twice about, taking hikes on farm perimeter roads or snatching pieces of fruit out of adjacent orchards, which are trespassing and theft, respectively. And that's really the primary issue here. As you know, the property is surrounded by development, and that's why it's been designated for development. I just want to leave by saying, as a regulatory body, you have to often say no in the interest of sensible land use planning. But sometimes you also have to say yes. This is one of those times. Thank you.
Thank you. Charlotte Crocker?
Good morning. Can you hear me? Mm-hmm. My name is Charlotte Crocker, and I'm a farmer in the Moore Park area. I'm here to support Charles Vanoni's request to have his property in East Ventura annexed to the city in order that it can be developed into something that is physically useful. After all, they've owned and farmed this property for more than 60 years, and when they first bought it, it was all farmland. Now they're surrounded by housing, commercial and industrial areas, and this makes farming the property increasingly difficult and much less fiscally viable. It's now 12 years or more since they began looking for a viable alternative use for this land. And as they've described, they've complied with every request to cooperate and show good faith. Today, I just wanted to mention, I did a little research, and I was looking at the county guidelines that LAFCo publishes, and one of them states, well, in a section of that, it states that from the general plan, this is, the purpose of this is to encourage urban development to occur within cities, enhance the regional responsibility of county government, and facilitate the orderly planning and development of Ventura County, which I think you are trying to do. But with the recent passage of SOAR 2050, and with the undeniable lack of affordable housing in the county, this is a win-win opportunity for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Carol Dames. I'm not sure I have the last name correct.
I probably misread my last name. It's okay. My name is Carol Dawes, Dawes. And I support this very strongly. I have worked very hard to have affordable housing in the community for low income, but I feel very strongly that we need property also that can house working families, and we have been lax in that in the city of Ventura, and I think this is a big plus. And this being an infill type piece of property is an ideal place for this. The Venoni family cannot continue to farm it because of many of the things that have been stated, and so it is a much better use to make it for affordable property that young families and others can purchase, rent, etc. We are landlords also, and I see from that standpoint how hard it is for families, and we need more business in the city of Ventura, and if we do not have housing for these families, we will not be able to attract the people that we need. And so I support this strongly and know that the Venonis plan to take that any money that they get from this, they will use to get another farm, which they will be able to ranch for generations to come, because I know that younger members of the family are set to continue the Venoni tradition. And I ask you to support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Matthew Jenup.
Thank you. It's Matthew Feenup, and I am speaking as a resident of the east side of Ventura and also as an economist at California Lutheran University. And I just wanted to speak briefly to the magnitude of the housing crisis in the county. So the magnitude of the housing crisis is such that this is a major driver of the remaking of the local and regional economy. That remaking is characterized by a flight of jobs, employers, and households from the county over the last years, and also characterized by increasing economic inequality, decreasing economic opportunity. And to highlight that, I want to point out that at the end of 2016, Ventura County was the only county in all of Southern California that had not recovered its pre-recession level of jobs. That's to say Ventura County is lagging all of its neighbors, lagging the region. And again, housing prices and low affordability is one of the driving factors in that mix. Population growth is now near zero. The labor force is declining. So this last year, there were fewer people with jobs living in Ventura County than there were the year before. And that is unprecedented for a non-recessionary economy in Southern California. And yet, despite that, housing prices continue to soar. We've now achieved more than 90% of 2005's pre-recession high. And I urge you to recall that was a bubble fueled by, by zero down payment loans, stated income loans, and the like. This is not a bubble pricing now. This is really a story of tremendous scarcity of available housing. And so people have to look beyond the county for economic opportunity. 80,000 people leave the county every single day to find a job that lets them live here. 40,000 drive into the county to work in jobs that don't allow them to live here. So thank you.
Thank you. Noreen Charnovsky?
Good morning, commissioners and staff. I really do sympathize with the terrible story that the Venonis have to tell. but I live in East Ventura, and I have nothing to gain personally by my opposition to the North Bank project. That is, I'm not running for public office. I will not receive any financial gain or anything else by urging you to support the LAFCo staff recommendation and defeat North Bank. I'm here today because of my conscience. Once I learned about this project, I felt I must speak against annexation. I drive down Wells Road, just a stone's throw from the property in question, at least 3 or 4 times a week. No matter the weather, as soon as I approach the intersection of Wells and Telephone, I make sure my car windows are closed and the air conditioning is running so that I don't have to breathe in the exhaust fumes from the many trucks and cars that already use this highway. I keep the windows closed until I cross over the Santa Clara River and leave the worst of the traffic congestion. As LAFCo has reported, the 24 acres is adjacent to industrial use businesses and even a sewage treatment facility. I just can't imagine that we would, in good conscience, want to offer housing on this land. I know there are political and relationship reasons of one kind or another that have moved this project forward, slowly as it is. But I wonder how many of our elected representatives will still be around when there's a price to pay for permitting families with children to live in such unhealthy conditions. Sorry I'm out of time, but I urge you to support your staff recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles Spurgeons.
Good morning. My name is Charles Spraggins. I'm 73-year-old. I'm too close?
No, I was just saying I mispronounced your name. My apologies.
Oh, no problem. My family came to this area in 1875. We've been around. I was born in this area. My father owned a ranch in East Ventura, and when they decided they didn't want to farm it any longer, they sold it to somebody else. He didn't cash in and feel that it was a socialist right to get a zoning change. It was a farm, and so he didn't want to farm it anymore. He sold the land. My grandfather was the owner of People's Lumber Company, which had lumber yards all over Ventura County. And so the development of this county, since I was born here, I've watched it. And I speak against this project. I think your staff has been a very honest, objective broker in analyzing the problems with this particular project. And so I haven't heard anything here. I know Mr. Lambert wouldn't want to deceive you about Ventura's net zero water policy, but being a solution for no water. But the fact of the matter is that our net zero policy ordinance is an in lieu fee arrangement where they collect dollars, but the dollars are not actually water. So the net zero fee is not providing available water.
Sir, you're out of time.
Thank you.
Michael McCall. He supports the annexation. Okay. Laura.
Masonheimer. I support the annexation.
Okay. Bill Burko.
Burke. I support the annexation.
Okay. Randy Axel.
Good morning.
You have 2 minutes.
Yes, it's still morning, I believe. I'm Randy Axel, a former member of this august commission of yours a long time ago. First, please approve this annexation. there's really not too many reasons why you shouldn't. Second, just an observation. I can't believe how this board and/or executive officer have morphed into both a planning commission and planning department all rolled into one. Remember, this proposal has the blessing of the city of Ventura. Both the planning commission, planning department, and the council. Your guidelines for orderly development are just that, guidelines. This project is an orderly expansion of the city of Ventura. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Laura Massenheimer
Whoops, that was me. Whoops,
supports the annexation.
support the annexation.
Graham Lyons.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, my name is Graham Lyons. I'm an attorney for North Bank Ventures, which is the developer, real party in interest. I trust you had a chance to review the letter that I delivered through Vince Daly last night. I apologize for the tardiness of it. Quite honestly, I didn't think that we would need to provide a letter, but obviously with staff's recommendation for disapproval after working not only 7 months here with the commission, but also with LAFCo staff throughout the city's process, we had assumed that we would be able to reach some sort of agreement. Obviously, at least according to staff, that hasn't happened. I wanted to talk briefly about some of the conditions of approval if the commission were to agree to the annexation, some of the conditions that have been proposed by staff. Our position, and I think I've stated this in the letter, is that these are unnecessary, that these issues have already been resolved through the conditions of approval that have been imposed on the project through the city. Specifically, it appears that the sanitation district approval, the condition has been resolved. Water supply, I think Mr. Lambert has addressed that. The city has said both in writing and verbally today that there is timely and adequate supply. Condition 9, which relates to the jurisdiction of the Watershed Protection District, I think there is a little confusion as to what the concern may be as to the condition that's been proposed by LAFCO staff. I believe Commissioner Parks had suggested that it really isn't it simple? The district has jurisdiction. If they have jurisdiction, there needs to be a permit. Why would the city be concerned about that? I can't speak for the city. I can speak for the applicant. Our concern is not about the jurisdiction. It's about the wording of that condition 9. If the applicant has already agreed through condition number 47, which is a condition of approval that was imposed by the city, that if there's any work that is going to be done within the jurisdiction of the Ventura County Watershed Protection District, that a permit would be obtained. And I'd like to just read into the record what that condition states. It says, a Watershed Protection District watercourse permit and permits and/or agreements from the California Department of Fish and Game and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers are required for any work within the Ventura County Watershed Protection District's jurisdiction. Complete plans and supporting engineering hydraulic calculations shall be submitted to the appropriate agency with the permit and/or agreement application. And then it goes on to talk about the final map. But I think it's very clear from that condition that if there's any work that's within the jurisdiction of the Watershed Protection District, the applicant has agreed that they will get a permit. And I think from what Mr. Walker, your counsel, has said, the district gets the initial determination whether or not there is work that's within its jurisdiction. So we believe that that condition satisfies any concerns there may be that work would be done in the project that is within the jurisdiction of the Watershed Protection District. Our concern is the language that has been put into Condition 9, which doesn't mention the word jurisdiction at all, and I think actually creates some confusion and some vagueness as to what the applicant in the city would need to do in this situation. And again, I apologize for going over, and I'll be as brief as possible here. Specifically, the language that we're concerned about is, if you read Condition 9, it requires essentially that the city submit to the executive officer an executed agreement between the city and the Watershed Protection District. And part of that will provide, and I'm reading sub B here, that the city shall request a determination by VCWPD on whether the linear park adjacent to the Brown Barranca will alter the flow of water or impair the use of that facility. If the VCWPD determines that the project may have that effect, the city and/or developer shall apply for a permit from VCWPD. I don't see the word jurisdiction in there. I don't see that there's a determination whether or not the work would require a permit. I simply see that there is an agreement that if there is some determination that there's an altering of flow or an impairment of a facility, that the city and the developer are required to file for a permit. I find that to be vague. I find that to be something that could be subject to interpretation. I think we've seen already throughout both of these hearings that there's already some confusion as to how this is supposed to work. Quite honestly, I think that Condition 47 clearly states what the applicant and what the city will be required to do if there's any work that's within the jurisdiction of the Watershed Protection District. With that, I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen Moss?
Well, it's still good morning. I'm Kieran Moss. I'm an appraiser, and I advise various property owners and government agencies. I wanted to mention that I contacted Nan Drake, who works for Harrison Industries, by email while I was paying attention, and she wrote back that Harrison has converted 26 of its fleet of trucks to natural gas, and they're phasing out whatever few diesels they still have. I'd also like to note that Commissioner Ramirez astutely pointed out that Lake Casitas had gotten down to 36%, but that was before it rained. It's now at 44%. So, and of course, Ventura doesn't get, this end of Ventura doesn't get water from Lake Casitas. Casitas ends over by the hospital, the community memorial, and it goes down Dos Caminos down to Telegraph and then down Dunning. And then we're standing on top of, you're sitting on top of the Mound Basin, which extends from about Pettit out to about the mall, somewhere around Mills. And then it gets water out of wells from the Mound Basin, wells from the Santa Paula Basin, and which this property is probably getting water from. The city will get water from the basin there. And then it has wells at the Foster Park and called the Nye wells in the Ventura River. And then it has the right to surface water out of the Ventura River, which it does not use. And it has the right to a surface collector over there. And then it has wells on the Oxnard Plain, and it has wells on the Oxnard Forebay. Those are on the golf courses over there. So, but most alarmingly, the 17,000 acre feet is incorrect. Their own report says they actually use 14,000, so there's actually a 3,000 surplus. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Daniel Cormody?
Morning, Chairman, members of the Commission. Since I got 2 minutes, I'm going to defer from my written email that you have a copy of. Mm-hmm. My concern is the water supply. If you will notice, the general manager of Ventura Water cites the EIRs as adequate water supply. Nowhere does she cite the 2016 and 2017 Comprehensive Water Resources Report as saying there's an adequate water supply. You notice there's no representative here from Ventura Water. You notice nowhere have they said that there's an adequate water supply. Other members of city staff are making that statement. But you notice she never made that statement. The Comprehensive Water Resources Report itself states there's an adequate water supply, and your own staff has reviewed those reports and concludes there is inadequate water. Also, there's issues from the Foster Park well field, impending reduction and loss of water from Santa Paula, from the Santa Paula Basin, and Casitas could go dry in 2 years if the drought continues. And that means water from the east end has to go to the west end. Those issues are not even discussed in a comprehensive water resources report. I support staff's recommendation that you deny this annexation primarily on the issue that there's not enough water.
Thank you. Will Thompson?
Chair Freeman? Chair Freeman?
Yes.
Over here. Over here. I just have to bring to your attention one of your local rules that says that meetings must end by noon unless there's majority approval of the commission to continue past noon, and a finding that you'll finish this matter before 5 p.m.
I'll take 30 seconds.
I'll move it and make that motion, that we continue.
Right, so are we going to set a timeline here? I mean, I don't have the ability to be here until 5 o'clock today.
The rule does not require a timeline. The rule just requires commission approval to continue past noon, and that's all the motion needs to address.
Is that to continue one item or the entire agenda?
To proceed with the meeting as scheduled.
When we come to those agenda items, we can determine whether to continue them or not.
Thanks.
And Madam Chair, I have a 1 o'clock appointment too.
Okay, is there a second on the motion to continue? Yes.
Mr. Ross, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm Will Thompson. My family and I have lived in Ventura for almost 49 years. There's only one crisis here in this world. All the other crises pale by comparison to our water supply crisis. This affects, as you know, everybody in the southwestern United States. There is no good reason that I have heard to do away with the lifestyle, safety, and health of millions of people in Southern California, because that's the overriding real crisis. We are going to have a drought. All of our estimates, both scientific and otherwise, have predicted that the drought will continue and that the air temperature average will continue and that our water supply is going to be taxed permanently. So I am hoping, and I hope that you take your recommendation of your staff and disapprove this measure. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other cards. Mr. Venoni, I didn't have a card from you. Come on up.
Okay. You've heard it all over and over. I'm going to try and keep this as short as I can, and I'm going to leave some stuff out here.
Let me interrupt you. Chair, there was some other cards that gave Mr. Venoni his time?
Yes, that's
Okay,
correct.
Okay.
We'll try to keep it to 5 minutes if you can, Mr. Venoni.
I'll try. I have this, and then I have a video that I'd like to show very quickly. Okay. My father purchased this property in question in 1954. At that time, it was surrounded by other ag land. When the city's general plan and the Telequai Wells plan were approved, they stated that when the property was annexed to the city, its best use would be residential. This brought the property under the city's sphere of influence and told us that development was inevitable. Still, we continued to farm, while all the other farmland that once neighbored our property was, with LAFCo's approval, annexed and the city by the city and transitioned to other uses. Seeing that we were quickly being surrounded by houses in 2004, we submitted an application to develop the property, and the city accepted the. Okay, we have made every effort to conform to the goals that have been set before us. Okay. This land was purchased not for speculation but to farm. However, now neighboring farms have been replaced by development. Farming is no longer practical or sustainable on this site. We are an island, we are surrounded. It is not fair to have put us or any other farmer in a position and expect us to survive or thrive. We are not farmers who want to be developers. We are farmers who want to farm. Farming is a business. We can no longer farm this property in question profitably. We live and work in the Las Posas Valley where Vanonis have farmed for over 100 years. We want to concentrate on farming where we are not surrounded by housing and other developments, but other agriculture. We hope that we might even be able to expand our operation there. This project has required nearly $500,000 from this family to reach this point in the development process, a sizable burden for any small business to bear, and we cannot continue. For all the reasons I have given, we feel that it would be unfair not to grant approval of the city's annexation of this infill project without conditions and let our family go on. And now I would like to show
Sir,
the video if I can.
In essence of time, I'd like to poll the commission
Leo's family moved to Saddle Point.
to see. Okay. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
In 1916, when he was only 1 year old. But I'm sure you'd rather hear him tell you all about it.
My grandfather came here in 1890. And one of his first jobs was on the Colorado Street Bridge in Pasadena. So it ended up from there, he kept working for farmers. And he worked down around Newberry Park. And he migrated on up this way. But I know when Dad bought the ranch in 1918, I guess he got almost half a Saddle, but he had lots all over. In fact, he used to own the land that came with that ranch, where they used to be the Saddle Walnut House and the Saddle Bean House. Because it's right adjoining the ranch there. He struggled, and Daddy worked hard, and he was so busy at the time because we took out our walnut orchard, and we just weren't making anything. And we just worked pretty hard to get trees in.
In 1944, Leo, as he often said, took the best piece of advice he'd been given and went to be introduced to a young woman in Santa Susana named Rita Schreiber. Leo and Rita were married the next year and started their own family the year after that.
I like the life I lived, and I'm just fortunate that I was able to raise my children here, and we feel like they turned out real well. I have 3 girls and a boy, which is the oldest, that takes care of the ranch now.
Leo partnered with his siblings and bought their own ranch in Somas in 1949.
118 and south of that is our ranch. It's 126 acres. And I bought the rural piece down there. It was 67 acres, my first venture farming.
Leo was very involved in the farming community and often referred to it as a family. He took an active interest in 4-H and made his biggest contributions as a summer camp leader. This also happens to be where he picked up the title Uncle Leo.
Where did you get this name?
Well, this name came through the involvement in 4-H. And I and my wife Rita, we always went to camp with the kids, stayed a week. And some of the little kids that would come in, they were pretty young, and Mom and Daddy would leave while they would cry. So I gathered them and told them things were okay, and I said, if you ever need something, come to Uncle Leo.
Uncle Leo.
And that name has stuck.
It's been down at the fairgrounds for about 50 years, hasn't it?
That's right.
Uncle Leo's Children's Barn has been a well-loved exhibitor at the Ventura County Fair. After his first exhibit back in 1956, Leo saw the need to continue providing a connection to agriculture for Ventura County families. Every year, setting up the barn is a true family affair, with generations of Vanonis pitching in to help set up displays and share Leo's passion. Uncle Leo's barn is full of activities encouraging youth to explore education and agriculture, and quickly became a way for Leo to share his passion for farming and everything ag.
Well, I love meeting people and I love the kids.
Leo has received numerous recognitions for the barn exhibit and his years of service to Ventura County, even being named Grand Marshal of Ventura County on 2 separate years, the first in 1986. Uncle Leo passed away in 2014, the day before fair. Although the man with the vision behind Uncle Leo's barn is gone, the Venoni family is working together to continue his legacy and to share their passion for farming in the agricultural community as well. Leo's family moved to South.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I have no other cards. I will close the public hearing and open it for discussion of the commission. Who's going first here?
I appreciate everyone coming out. I recognize a lot of faces, particularly from the farming community, which I count myself as one of them. As a farmer of avocados and lemons in Moore Park, very aware of the issues affecting farms in Ventura County. Also, I am involved in the real estate industry for residential markets involving single-family homes and multi-unit properties. So I recognize we do have a water crisis. We also have a housing crisis. I don't think that, and without speaking for everyone up here, that anyone would disagree that we need housing in Ventura County. I'm not pro-development, I'm pro-smart development. The issue for me here today is we are, as a commission, responsible with the orderly formation of cities and special districts. One of the things we need to look at is, are there adequate resources for future development on this parcel? I'm not convinced that we have adequate water, timely and adequate water. I keep hearing it's almost like you're asking us to have faith that you will have water when the time comes, and it very well may be that that could happen. But I don't want to trust without verifying, and that's why I feel like, from my perspective as the public commissioner, I need proof. I need real tangible data that you have timely and adequate water for this development. And I am surprised that there's no one from Ventura Water here to speak on that clearly and loudly. If they were up here today, adamant, yes, we have adequate and timely water, it'd be hard for me to deny that. But I don't see that. Aside from water, I have visited the perimeter of this location on 2 occasions, once in the afternoon and once in the morning. The first time, lots of noise. I know we've all discussed that there's lots of noise-producing entities surrounding the property. Interestingly enough, the loudest noise came from the sanitation district, the sewer treatment plant on the south side of the property. I have video that I recorded of that sound, and it's loud and it's very obnoxious. I wish someone from the sanitation district was here. I saw them leave before I could get a chance to ask them about the question, how often does that sound go off? Because it was there when I was there in the afternoon, it was there in the morning as well. And having multi-unit developments within 300 feet or 200 feet of the sounds of these pumps or generators, whatever is making the noise, that's not going to go away for the foreseeable future. Eventually, I imagine that this sewer district will become obsolete, tie into Ventura City. It's going to be great. That's not here yet. Also, the smell. I didn't notice the smell the first time I was there because the wind was blowing towards the east. Second time in the morning, the wind was blowing to the west. And one lady mentioned that she rolls up her windows as she drives by this area. I had my windows down to listen for noise, and I realized that there was this internal thought, I need to pull the windows up because this smell is insane. Then I realized, oh my gosh, this smell, the people who live in this area are going to have to experience that. I really hope that the city recognizes that when houses do go in this property, and houses will be here someday, that you're going to have a big problem with the residents complaining to you, what is all this noise? What is all this sound? I really hope you guys have a plan for how you're going to address those problems, work with the industries around there so that those issues can be mitigated in the future. Nothing against the Venoni family. I feel for you. I have properties in similar condition as yours. It's not an issue with your family or the property. I believe in my mind it's an issue with the city, incapable of proving to us that they have timely and adequate water supplies. I'm willing to make a motion, and I'm not yet, to approve this conditional on the city providing substantial data that proves without a reasonable doubt that there is water for this project in the future. That's about all I have right now.
Other commissioners?
Wait to hear. The Newhall Ranch Development Project was one of the first where a judge just ruled you can't just say you're going to have water and you can't have what they called suitcase water. You actually have to prove it. And we have the city's own report showing there's a deficiency existing with drought. And so there is no proof that there is sufficient water. So I do agree with Commissioner Ross that that is a major flaw. You need to prove you got the water. And I think that's going to be difficult until you actually have it. If you're going to be doing these major projects, you know, if and when they occur, then you may have the water, and then that would be the appropriate time. I also feel for the Venoni family, listening to the passion of, you know, how hard it has been for the family. But in my mind, I also think about the mother with a 4-year-old kid with asthma and having the diesel trucks, even if it's only 75 of the 100, starting up all at the same time. I can smell it in my neighborhood just when the trash trucks go by, and that's, you know, a couple of trucks. But to have that every single morning happening nearby, I think that is a health concern. And that's why I'm saying, you know, if this weren't somewhere where what they refer to as sensitive receptors, those are people living right nearby 24 hours a day, if it were a zone for industrial because we need the jobs, or it's zoned for office space because we need the jobs, you're not going to have people living there 24 hours a day and children. I think about all the developments that I have reviewed over my history of being on planning commissions and councils and board of supervisors, LAFCo and others. This has got to be the worst that I have seen in terms of the impacts to the residents. Smelly, noisy, particulate matter. These are things that if you're living there. I've got one side is the garbage trucks. The other side is open sewer tanks that have smell. Not even talking about what is the potential from the diesel fueling station with the fumes that you have there. Other things that were raised like vibration and glare and light, those things to me can be dealt with or you can accept, but not when it actually affects your health. And that is my real concern, is the health of the people who will be living there. You open your window and you've got diesel emissions coming in, you've got the smell of the sewer plant coming in. But from a true, that we can argue, well, we get used to it, you know, people know you have disclosures and all that. But the fact that there isn't adequate water, I think, is a huge barrier to overcome. We also discussed flooding. It sounds like that can be, that's something that can be worked out in the terms of if it's within the jurisdiction, obviously. Flood control or watershed protection district has to have its say, and however that works out, it does have to follow the law there. But I do think the biggest problem you have here from a legal perspective, and it is clear there isn't adequate water that has been proven to exist. So it's just not timely if you do get to that situation. where there is water, then this would be something to move forward. But at this point in time, there is only proof that shows that there's inadequate water supply. That's the only proof we have.
Commissioner Zaragoza?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank all the people that are here today to testify on this matter. I want to share that I've worked with Mr. Daly in the past over in Oxnard, and what Mr. Daly says he comes through with. I know I've worked with him over at Wagon Wheel and for many, many years, and he has done that. I'm looking at alternative action number 1, the approval of the commission subject to the condition 9, 10, and 11. And it talks about the conditions of recordation. You know, I heard that, and I saw that Tully is willing to work with Watershed with Mr. Vargas on who is going to be in charge of the permitting process. And their attorney already said that the watershed protection people are going to be the primary persons, but I think the city can work with them. I worked with Tully before and have a lot of confidence with Tully. The condition number 10, I talked to Mark Norris before from the Santa Cruz Sanitation District, and he said they've worked with the city and they're looking at working some of the conditions that are there. And I think the project is going to be away from the tanks. You know, there's going to be a buffer there, so between that, and also that the water, there's a timely available. I think I can't remember. I forgot your name. Lambert mentioned, you know, that the water's coming from someplace. That's what you're saying, Mr. Lambert. Can you come back and tell us again exactly where that water's going to come from?
And as he's coming up, I just want to clarify, you're supporting number 2, not number 1. Number 1 is
Yes, number
disapproval.
2.
But you're supporting number 2.
Number 2, I'm sorry.
Alternative number 1.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, okay.
The question was, where is the water coming from?
Yeah, you said timely available water.
3 locations. One, we already have existing sources from the groundwater that we currently use. There's 3 new sources we're pursuing. One is connection to the State Water Project. We're engineering that connection right now. It's funded. We can proceed with that construction. 2, we're actually doing the environmental preliminary work to site a direct potable reuse plant, and also could be a desalination plant that we could actually generate our own additional water supply here locally. And we've had a testing pilot program to do that for the last several years. It's been very successful, and we're actively working through that. And 3rd is the net zero. And I would correct the record that was said by one of the folks testifying. It's not a net zero fee, it's a net zero policy. And what that means is the developer either delivers water, or if they can't, they pay a fee.
Okay.
It's not a fee. The fee is sort of the last resort if they can't deliver water, or either by giving us their water rights or finding some other way to reduce water use. They could even reduce water use off-site in order to make up for their new demand.
So in Shauna's letters, it says that, yes, you do have the water?
That's the way I read her letter, yes.
What option, am I looking at option?
2.
Option 2, right?
Yeah, it would be the attachment to the resolution of approval with those conditions.
Okay, option 2 then. I would kind of favor option 2.
Other comments from commissioners?
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. You know, I feel like the city made a promise to the Venoni family, and it seems like it was a promise a long time ago. And not so long ago in the city of Oxnard, we had the same thing with the Mulhart family being surrounded by development, and they could no longer farm on their land too. LAFCo supported annexing that to the city of Oxnard, and it feels like the same thing here for the Venoni family, where they did everything that was asked of them. Everything that came along, they did, and with the assurance that this was going to happen someday. So I feel like the right thing to do is to move ahead with the approval of the project. I went back and did some research, after our last meeting, and we came back, there were 4 issues that were really of concern with me today. And we talked about water, land use, sanitation, and watershed. And I feel like all of those that we as the commission asked of the applicant have been answered to my satisfaction. Sanitation, that's already been resolved. We didn't talk about that today. But with the water, the city of Ventura has policies in place. They have plans in place, strategic plans for long-term water. The EIR, the March 28th letter, dealing with the issues with the comprehensive water resources report. I think that it's all there. And all of the documents that we asked for them to certify that things were in place for timely availability of water is there. So I checked that off my list. Looking at land use conflicts, they've agreed that to do disclosures to all of the people that are going in there. And they've said they'd be willing to work together and make sure that all of that comes to fruition. There's a housing crisis definitely in Ventura County that impacts our business community and for people to move in here. We heard from a well-known and recognized economist here today. Matthew Feinup is one of the most recognized around the state, and he talks about that. It's not his first time talking about housing crisis and the impacts of that, and the people leaving our county every day because they can't afford to live here or have a job here. And lastly, with the watershed protection, I think there needs to be some work done there and some conversation done. But what I heard today was that the city is willing to work together with Watershed. Watershed is willing to work together. They've had meetings between the February meeting and the April meeting, which they agreed to do. The city said that they're committed to working together. There's some issues, it sounds like, with the Brown Barranca for improvements. And I think that issue has been addressed here. So to me, it's like all four of those issues that we have been analyzing and analyzing and analyzing, almost to the point that it feels like if we tire them out long enough, that we'll say no. And so I feel like it's time for us to take action today. And if we need to have some sort of conditions that will come back to validate what was said here today, then yes. That's okay, because it sounds like everybody's willing to work together. But to disapprove this project almost seems criminal in my mind, that we need to take an action to move it forward and to honor commitments that have been made to this family and to the city of Ventura, who has built this development into their plan, into their city plan and their general plans, and has looked at all of that. And I look to the experts that are going to come back with some of those certifications, to put that in. So those are my comments.
Commissioner Ramirez?
Thank you. I did want to hear what my fellow commissioner said, because this is a difficult issue, and really paying attention to everything everybody says. And I want to, just because Commissioner Rooney just did mention the Malhart project, which I voted to annex when I was a council member, voted to move forward. That property is absolutely prime for annexation. It's not next to a metal recycler, a trash truck, a yard, or a sanitation plant. It's quite a different kettle of fish. But so I want to say a few things, because I am I'm very concerned about the water. I want to trust the city of Ventura, but I think it's very telling that we don't have a very clear statement from the city of Ventura. It's not very clear, and I'm wondering why we don't have someone from Ventura Water here to talk about it, because tell me if I'm wrong, it looks like the city has in their own documents said they have for next year a deficit of potentially 2,813 acre feet. And I know I'm a lawyer. This is not my field, but I want to see something in writing. I appreciate Mr. Lambert and the other folks coming and making representations, but I do think we need something a little more definite that is in writing about the water supply. And Mr. Lyons spoke, and I appreciate his comments, very thoughtful, and proper role of an advocate. But in his letter, page 5, fourth paragraph, he says, "We fail to see any reliable evidence to support staff's position that the city's water demand analysis is insufficient to ensure adequate supply for the project." Well, I see a failure of evidence myself, so I would ask that we get that. I know we need housing. I supported SOAR 2050. This is an infill project, and ordinarily I would easily vote to totally approve it. I do think there's some very strong challenges, and I'm thinking of environmental justice here, because we know who's going to live in the multifamily units. They're going to be families of lesser means than the people, and they are going to be sucking up their children are going to be sucking up the particulate matter, smelling the sanitation district, and we're all responsible for these things. These are basic utilities, but who is actually going to bear the burden? So I don't know how that can be mitigated. I know we need housing. I know there's residents there, and that's very compelling that we have this other residential property right next to it. I want to appreciate the professional work of our staff. I may want to support this project going forward with some conditions. I want to hear I want to hear actually the motion that Commissioner Ross wants to make. I feel for this family. It was a very good appeal, and you've been providing for this community a lot. It was an emotional appeal, and I want to hear your motion, but I also want to do our job, which is to later on make the right decision for the community. So I do have some questions. It's not going to be these. I don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good, but I have a few little doubts out here, particularly about water supply. So I'll leave it there.
Commissioner Parvin?
Well, we have notes that go all over the place because we bounce back and forth from different topics. But with regard to land use, I mean, look at this property. It's an island, really. It's surrounded by railroad track, barranca, a neighborhood, industrial, and I'm not sure what use other than what the developer was promised for years and years and years, which was housing. And we talked about the flood control. We've been talking about it over and over and over, and I think we're past that. Personally, I am. I think it's done. Especially when the city put Condition 47, when you read the Condition 47 and the city's Planning Commission resolution, I'm sure that we can cover it there. The water supply, because I'm a representative of the city, I guess I just trust cities, and some people just aren't as trusting, but they are trained engineers, whether they're a public works director, whether they're a planning director, they are professionally trained. And if they tell me that they are planning a reclamation for water, they will have water, and they currently have timely and adequate water supply. They have developments they haven't yet built. They've allocated water for those projects that they haven't yet built, so that's included in those numbers. But what's really key is that the city controls the building permits, and I think we aren't focusing in on that. If they don't have the water, they're not going to allow the house to be built. It just won't happen. So that to me is another item done. And with regard to odors from the sanitary district, it was my understanding that there would be some walls around the equipment, and I think they mentioned that today. I don't know how tall the walls are specifically, But I'm sure that if they're tall enough, there would be a lot of noise elimination there. And I don't know how the air flows in that neighborhood, but I'm sure that would be addressed when they do the plan. Let's see, our need for housing. Everybody knows we need housing. We need housing all over the entire county. And we need different types of housing, and this project provides that, 3 different types of housing styles. And let's see, there were no complaints from the residents that live to the south of this neighborhood as far as odors, noise, any of that, according to city staff, because I asked them that question. And let's see, I love Uncle Leo, by the way. I think your Uncle Leo is fantastic, and I wish he was my Uncle Leo. I do believe this project is actually very orderly. When you look at the fact that it's an island it's surrounded by so many different uses. And it's funny when you think about noise, because if you think a train is quiet, I mean, this is going to be a noisy neighborhood. And when people are notified that they're going to live next to an industrial area, I think they might be prompted to go over and take a look. Because when I bought my house, long before I had any planning experience, I checked the FEMA flood maps. I looked where any dams were located. These are the kind of things that homeowners should be looking at when they make their decision on whether or not to move to a neighborhood. So I know if they're moving into Ventura County, these are very intelligent people. So I'm going to just say that I am certain that they will check off those boxes that, no, that really won't have an impact on me. I think we have to give the homeowners the benefit of the doubt, too. So that's my comments. I think I've covered it.
First, I want to thank all the people that came here and have given the time. This project probably has been under a longer review than most projects. And as a result, I think everyone understands all of the ramifications of the project. In terms of land use, I think between the barranca and the buffer and the landscaping, they've done the best that could be done for the property as residential. It abuts residential, so it's logical that residential would continue rather than having a commercial next to or other industrial next to the new residential. So I don't have a problem with the land use compatibility. I think there's sufficient buffers. And as Harrison pointed out, I think that the trucks are being converted to natural gas. I know Waste Management has that, and you don't smell a thing. As far as flood control watershed protection district, I think that with Tully's letter and the commitment of Watershed Protection District, I think once the final engineering is done, and if there is a finding that the property needs a watershed protection permit, I think that will be worked out. I don't think there's any resistance to that. In terms of water, as a condition, I think it would be appropriate perhaps for this body to condition, which we have the authority to do, for the city to provide a letter. I don't know how, Dave, how your condition would read, but a documentation on the various options that the city is exploring and how much water that will provide and when, and have that as a part of a condition of approval that would be given to LAFCo prior to the annexation. And normally, a city has to grant something like a will serve letter anyway when there's a building permit being issued. So as Commissioner Parvin said, if there's no water, they're not going to get that will serve letter. I mean, that's just the way it is. If there's no water, you're not going to get a building permit. But I think it would be appropriate for the city, we're all feeling well up here today. It'd be appropriate for the city to provide that documentation to LAFCo prior to the annexation occurring. And I think that those are the sum total of my comments. I appreciate Tully's letter. And is there any other comment of the commission? With that, I need a motion.
Well, what I had in mind was in attachment to condition 11, that's page 32 of the staff report, what Kai has recommended for this particular alternative action is the reorganization shall not be recorded until the general manager of Ventura Water submits to the LAFCo executive officer written confirmation with supporting documentation that the city has an adequate and available long-term water supply to meet demand.
Do I have a second to that motion?
I'm just reading
you're not
off.
done yet. Okay.
That's what I've been looking at as I would like to see that as part of the motion. I would be okay with approving this reorganization if that is in there. Now, it's a little subjective. I'm not really sure the mechanics of it, Kai. Does that give you full discretion to then approve the project if it meets your standards, or does it come back to us and we have to work on this again?
I mean, if it's clear, then I'd be happy if you want to give me the authority to move forward with it. If there's any doubt about it, or if the city disagrees, I'd be happy to bring it back to the commission to make that determination.
And so I recognize several of these projects, and I'm assuming it would be in this documentation, is we will have water once the pipeline is connected with Callegas. We will have water when the recycling water plant is constructed. Would that satisfy you? What kind of documents would you want to see regarding those projects as, okay, that's proof, this is going to happen, it's just a matter of time?
I think just a flat-out straight statement from the manager saying that the city has an adequate, timely available water supply to meet its demands, and this is why. And that's it, with reference to this project. That should suffice.
So you can put that on
Commissioner
attachment
That's right.
3 with that condition. If you make that motion, I will second that.
It's a written one, right? That's what you
Yes.
want?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Written documentation.
Yeah, that, to me, that's what I
Or I'll
asked
make the
Mr.
motion.
Lambert
You want me to
initially.
go?
There was a motion and a second.
I did not make a
I
motion.
will
did not-
make a motion
okay.
to accept option attachment number 3 with the condition of the reorganization shall not be recorded until the general manager of Ventura Water submits to the LAFCo executive director written confirmation with supporting documentation that the city has adequate and available long-term water supply to meet demand.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I think we might need a roll call.
Roll call, yeah.
Excuse me, roll call.
Commissioner Parks?
Appreciate the work on water, but I still have concerns for the health impacts for the people living there, so I'll vote no.
Commissioner Parvin?
Yes.
Commissioner Ramirez?
I have some concerns, but I'm going to vote yes.
Did you say yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Rooney?
Yes.
Commissioner Ross?
Yes.
Commissioner Zaragoza?
Yes.
Chair Friedman?
Yes. So the motion passes to annex the property to the city of Ventura with the condition for water documentation. Thank you, everybody. Okay, we have several items left on the agenda. Are we going to, do we want to continue these to the next meeting?
How much?
I mean, as long as there's nothing timely, I
have till
suggest
1 o'clock.
moving it to the next.
Okay. The budget, I guess, has a time limit on it. Kai?
Yeah, the commission is required to act on the budget, the proposed budget today, or at least before the 31st of this month.
I would clarify on that if I can, Kai.
Yeah, sure.
You know, there is a statute in LAFCo that says you are to approve the proposed budget by May 1. However, there's no penalty built into that, so if you don't do it by May 1, you know, there's nobody's slapping your hand. However, I think the issue is you do have to adopt a proposed budget before the final budget because the proposed budget needs to go to the cities and the counties and the special districts so they can have input if they want to. So that would mean if you were not to do it today, you'd have to do the proposed budget in May, and then the final budget in June. It wouldn't allow you any time in between adopting the proposed budget and adopting the final budget to work out any issues, however, so that's the other drawback.
Is there a motion on the proposed budget?
But Madam
Yeah,
Chair,
I'll move approval.
I'll second it, because we had a prelim, and I'll second it.
But I would also ask that we continue the rest of the agenda then.
Yeah.
I agree.
I'll second the budget.
Oh, wait. So the proposed budget was, there was a motion
Yes.
by Commissioner Park, second by Commissioner
Zaragoza.
Zaragoza, to approve the
To approve the
proposed
budget.
budget.
Gotcha, okay.
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
And then there was a second motion to continue the other items on the agenda till the May,
To our next meeting.
to our
May I
next meeting.
I'll
request-
second it.
Could you repeat the motioner for the budget approval?
I made the
The
motion.
motion was to approve the proposed budget as
And that was
presented.
Commissioner,
Yes.
And I second it.
Yeah.
Could I indulge you? Would the commission be able to take an action on item number 9? It's just that we are proposing no changes to the fee schedule.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Oh, go
I do have
ahead.
one comment on that. Just, is there any possibility that in the future we can consider or at least look into lowering fees? Just a thought.
Well, that's what we look into, whether these fees cover the costs that it takes staff to work on them. If it's determined that they are too high, we would certainly recommend that they be lowered. That hasn't occurred.
Okay.
So we do that every year as part of this process.
Do you need a vote on that?
I'm sorry, the
I
fee
need a
schedule.
motion and a second.
Was,
I think the budget.
The budget.
The budget, we did the budget.
We did the budget. This is the fee schedule.
We did that too.
I move.
Commissioner Ramirez made the motion, seconded by Commissioner Parvin, to approve the fee schedule. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And I would need then a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
And I just want to comment here, a long-term commissioner, as you know, Ted Granson, passed away.
Yes.
And he was very much a part of special districts, city council, county supervisor, and was very active in LAFCo. And I just want him to be remembered as part of our minutes.
Why don't you close the meeting and?
I would like to close the meeting in his honor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
That was good. That was good.
Yeah.
Constructive meeting.